What happens when a noblewoman, betrayed and left to die in the unforgiving desert, crosses paths with a powerful king on a mission? This is a story of resilience, fate, and a love that defies all odds. Stay with me to discover how one woman's darkest hour sparked an incredible journey that would change the course of two kingdoms. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you like the story and where you're watching from and why you're following this reading. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon, painting the desolate landscape of Sindral Desert in hues of crimson and gold. Lady Eowyn, once the proud daughter of the esteemed Count of Northumbria, now found herself being dragged across the barren wasteland by three of her husband's knights. Her once elegant gown was now torn and soiled, her auburn hair, usually arranged in elaborate braids befitting her station, hung in tangled disarray around her pale face. Despite the humiliation burning through her veins, she maintained her composure, refusing to give her captors the satisfaction of seeing her break. "Please," she whispered, her voice hoarse from thirst, "tell me what evidence Duke Aldrich has against me." "What proof of this alleged betrayal?" The lead knight, a gruff man with a scar bisecting his weathered face, refused to meet her gaze. "Not our place to question the Duke's orders, milady. He says you conspired with his enemies, and that's enough for us." Eowyn's heart clenched painfully in her chest. At 40 years of age, she had spent the last decade trying to be the perfect wife to a man who had never shown her even a fraction of the respect she deserved. She had managed his household, entertained his allies, and turned a blind eye to his numerous affairs, all while maintaining her dignity. And this was how he repaid her loyalty, with false accusations and a death sentence disguised as banishment. The knights halted their horses in the middle of nowhere. Nothing but sand and sparse, thorny shrubs stretched to the horizon. The scarred knight dismounted and roughly pulled Eowyn from her saddle. She stumbled but caught herself before falling, unwilling to kneel before these men who were carrying out such a dishonorable command. "The Duke's orders are to leave you here," the knight said flatly, handing her a single waterskin that felt dangerously light. "What happens after is no longer our concern." Eowyn accepted the meager offering with steady hands. "Tell Duke Aldrich that even in this final act of cruelty he has failed to break my spirit." Her voice remained calm, betraying none of the fear that threatened to overwhelm her. "And when you return to your beds tonight, remember the face of the innocent woman you abandoned to die." The knights shifted uncomfortably, but their loyalty to their lord outweighed any moral qualms. Without another word, they mounted their steeds and rode away, leaving a cloud of dust in their wake that seemed to seal Eowyn's fate. As the sound of hoofbeats faded into the distance, Eowyn's composure finally crumbled. She sank to her knees, hot tears streaming down her cheeks. But the voice of her father, stern yet loving, echoed in her memory. "A noble heart does not surrender to despair, my child. It finds strength in adversity." Miles away, in the neighboring kingdom of Caerwyn, King Ronan rode at the head of a small but formidable company. At 42, he cut an imposing figure astride his midnight black warhorse. His broad shoulders were draped in a fur-lined cloak of deep blue, fastened with a silver clasp bearing his family's wolf emblem. A well-trimmed beard framed his strong jawline, and his piercing gray eyes surveyed the landscape with the practiced vigilance of a seasoned warrior. Ronan was en route to the eastern provinces to negotiate a crucial treaty that would secure his kingdom's borders. His reputation as a just and powerful ruler had earned him the respect of both allies and enemies alike. But he knew that peace was a delicate thing, constantly requiring tending like a fragile flame. "Your Grace," called Sir Gareth, his most trusted knight, pointing ahead. "A merchant caravan approaches." Ronan nodded, raising his hand to signal his men to slow their pace. The caravan was small, 3 wagons accompanied by a handful of guards, and what appeared to be desert nomads serving as guides. The king's presence caused an immediate stir among the merchants, who hastily bowed as he approached. "Rise," Ronan commanded, his voice deep but not unkind. "What news from the east?" The caravan master, a portly man with a sun-weathered face, stepped forward. "The routes are safe, Your Grace, thanks to your patrols. Though we did encounter something unusual, Ronan raised an eyebrow. Speak freely. We came across knights bearing the crest of Winthorpe, your grace. Duke Aldrich's men, the merchant explained. They were leaving a woman in the desert, abandoning her to die by the looks of it. An old nomad with a white beard stepped forward, his dark eyes gleaming with wisdom and concern. A noblewoman, by her speech and bearing, left with nothing but a water skin that won't last 2 days in the cindral heat. Something cold settled in Ronan's chest. Duke Aldrich's reputation for ambition and cruelty was well known, but this was beyond contemptible. How long ago was this, and where exactly? The nomad pointed eastward. Half a day's ride following the old trade route, near the stone, formation that looks like a sleeping dragon. Without hesitation, Ronan turned to Sir Gareth. Take half our men and continue to the eastern provinces. The treaty cannot wait. Then, to the rest of his guard, the rest of you will come with me. We ride for the Cindral Desert. Sir Gareth looked concerned. Your Grace, is it wise to divert your journey for a stranger? Ronan's expression hardened. No honorable king can ignore such barbarity on his doorstep. If we abandon those in need, we are no better than Duke Aldrich himself. As the sun began to set over the desert, Elawan had managed to drag herself to the shadow of a large rock formation. The temperature had dropped dramatically with nightfall, and her thin, tattered dress offered little protection against the biting cold. Her lips were cracked, her throat parched despite carefully rationing. The precious water. She knew with stark clarity that without help she would not survive another day. As darkness enveloped the landscape, Elawan gazed up at the stars that dotted the vast canvas of the night sky. She thought of her father, now 5 years in his grave, and wondered if she would soon join him. The thought brought a strange calm. I tried to live with honor, Father, she whispered to the night, even when it was not returned to me. Her eyelids grew heavy, exhaustion and dehydration taking their toll. As her consciousness began to fade, Elawan thought she heard the distant thunder of hoofbeats. A hallucination, surely, her mind's final gift before the end. But the sound grew louder, more distinct. With the last of her strength, Elawan forced her eyes open. Against the silver disk of the full moon, a striking silhouette appeared. A rider on a powerful black stallion, flanked by soldiers bearing torches. The figure dismounted in one fluid motion and strode toward her. Even in her delirious state, Elawan recognized the royal insignia on his armor. King Ronan knelt beside her, his expression a mixture of concern and barely contained fury at finding her in such a state. He removed his heavy cloak and gently wrapped it around her trembling shoulders. You're safe now, my lady, he said, his voice low and reassuring as he lifted her into his strong arms. You have my word. As consciousness slipped away, Elawan's gaze met the king's. In that brief moment, something unspoken passed between them, a connection that transcended their circumstances, a silent promise of change that would alter both their destinies forever. Warmth enveloped Elawan as consciousness slowly returned. Her eyes fluttered open to find herself in a luxurious chamber, nestled beneath layers of fur and fine silk. Ornate tapestries adorned the stone walls, depicting heroic battles and legendary hunts. A crackling fire cast dancing shadows across the room, its warmth a stark contrast to the desert's merciless cold that still haunted her memory. For a moment, disorientation clouded her mind. Had it all been a terrible nightmare? The betrayal, the desert, the abandonment, but the lingering soreness in her limbs and the rawness of her throat confirmed the brutal reality. A soft knock at the door preceded the entrance of a stately woman in her 50s, carrying a silver tray with steaming broth and bread. You're awake, my lady. I am Lady Morgana, the king's healer, she said, her voice gentle but authoritative. His Majesty will be relieved to hear it. You've been unconscious for 2 days. Elawan attempted to sit up, wincing at the effort. 2 days? Where am I? Castle Caerwyn, my lady, King Ronan's fortress. Lady Morgana set down the tray and helped Elawan into a sitting position, propping her up with silk pillows. You were severely dehydrated when His Majesty found you. It's a miracle you survived. Miracle. The word seemed almost inappropriate for her current circumstance. Surviving one form of exile only to find herself in another unfamiliar place, dependent on the mercy of strangers, even royal ones. Why would the king concern himself with me? Elowen asked, accepting the bowl of broth with trembling hands. Lady Morgana's expression softened. His Majesty has a strong sense of justice. When he heard what had happened, she paused, choosing her words carefully. Let's just say Duke Aldrich's actions have not endeared him to our king. As Elowen sipped the rich, savory broth, the chamber door opened again. King Ronan entered, his commanding presence filling the room instantly. Gone was the battlefield armor. He now wore a fitted tunic of deep blue velvet with subtle silver embroidery at the collar and cuffs. A simple circlet of silver rested upon his dark hair, the only visible symbol of his royal status. Lady Morgana bowed and quietly excused herself, leaving Elowen alone with the king. Lady Elowen, Ronan said, his deep voice resonating in the chamber, as he approached the bedside. It pleases me to see you recovering. Elowen instinctively attempted to rise or at least offer some gesture of respect, but Ronan raised a hand to stop her. Please, conserve your strength. There is no need for formalities when you are still healing. He took a seat in a carved wooden chair beside her bed, his gray eyes studying her face with an intensity that made her both uncomfortable and strangely reassured. I must thank you for your intervention, Your Majesty, Elowen said, her voice still raspy. Though I confess I don't understand why you would go to such lengths for a stranger. Ronan's expression darkened slightly. No honorable ruler could ignore such a blatant act of cruelty within reach of his kingdom. He leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. The merchant who informed me of your plight seemed to believe you were of noble birth. Elowen hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. In her experience, the truth rarely served women well in the games of power played by men. And yet, this king had saved her life. I was, the wife of Duke Aldrich of Winthorpe, she admitted finally. Daughter of Count Edric of Northumbria, who passed 5 years ago. Recognition flickered in Ronan's eyes. Count Edric was known to be an honorable man, a skilled diplomat. I met him once, many years ago. He paused, clearly weighing his next words. Would you tell me why Duke Aldrich chose to abandon his wife in such a manner? The directness of the question caught Elowen off guard. She set down her bowl, her appetite suddenly gone. He accused me of betrayal, of conspiring with his enemies. Her voice was steady despite the pain behind the words. It was a falsehood, Your Majesty, a convenient lie to dispose of a wife who had served her purpose. And what purpose was that? Ronan asked, his tone neutral but his eyes keenly observant. Political alliance with my father's lands. Status through marriage to a respected family. Elowen met his gaze directly. And perhaps most importantly, a scapegoat when his own schemes required one. A tense silence filled the room as Ronan processed her words. Elowen feared she had spoken too freely, but the king's next words surprised her. I have known Duke Aldrich by reputation only. Our kingdoms share borders, but little else. Ronan's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. What I know suggests a man driven by ambition rather than honor. An accurate assessment, Your Majesty, Elowen replied, a hint of bitterness seeping into her voice. My husband valued power above all else, including the sanctity of marriage vows. Miles away in Winthorpe Castle, Duke Aldrich sat at his ornate desk, a goblet of wine in his hand as he reviewed correspondence. At 43, he remained a handsome man, with sharp features and calculating blue eyes that rarely revealed his true thoughts. His rich burgundy doublet, adorned with subtle gold threading, emphasized his broad shoulders and slim waist, a physique he maintained through regular training, even as he grew older. A knock at the door announced the arrival of Sir Malcolm, the knight who had led Elowen's desert escort. Enter, Aldrich commanded, not bothering to look up from his papers. Sir Malcolm stepped forward, removing his helmet to reveal his scarred face. It is done, my lord. Lady Elowen was left in the Sindral Desert as ordered. Aldrich finally raised his eyes, a satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "And you're certain she had no means of survival?" "One water skin, my lord. Not enough to last more than a day in that heat. By now she will have—" "Good." Aldrich cut him off, with a dismissive wave. "I want no details, only confirmation. As far as the court is concerned, my wife tragically perished while traveling to visit a distant cousin. A sandstorm, perhaps." He took a long sip of wine. "Prepare the appropriate mourning displays. Nothing excessive. I was, after all, a devoted husband deeply grieved by this unexpected loss." Sir Malcolm shifted uncomfortably. "Yes, my lord. Although what?" Aldrich's voice hardened. "We encountered a merchant caravan on our return journey. They saw us with Lady Alowan." Aldrich's fingers tightened around his goblet. "And?" "They were heading west, toward Caerwyn." A tense silence filled the chamber. Aldrich set down his wine with deliberate care. "Find out what became of that caravan. I want to know exactly who they spoke to." His eyes narrowed. "And send word to Lady Isabel. Tell her I require her company tonight." Back in Caerwyn, as evening fell, Elowen stood at the window of her chamber, watching the castle courtyard below. Servants hurried about their duties, guards patrolled the walls, and life continued with the orderly rhythm of a well-managed household. It reminded her painfully of her own work at Winthorpe. Work that had gone unappreciated, even scorned. Another knock at her door revealed a young maidservant bearing fresh clothing. "His Majesty thought you might prefer garments better suited to your station, my lady," the girl explained, laying out a gown of deep emerald silk with subtle silver embroidery. "And he requests your company for dinner, if you feel strong enough." Elowen ran her fingers over the fine fabric, a small kindness that nearly brought tears to her eyes. After a decade of emotional neglect, such consideration felt almost foreign. "Please tell His Majesty I would be honored," she replied. An hour later, dressed in the new gown that complemented her auburn hair and fair complexion, Elowen was escorted to a private dining chamber. King Ronan awaited her, rising from his seat. As she entered, the table was set for an intimate meal, with candles casting a warm glow over the polished wood. "Lady Alowan," he greeted her with a slight bow. "You look much recovered." "Thanks to your hospitality, Your Majesty," she replied, taking the seat a servant pulled out for her. As the first course was served, a delicate soup of wild mushrooms and herbs, Ronan studied her with that same intense gaze she had noticed earlier. "I hope you understand," he said finally, "that while you are welcome in Caerwyn for as long as you wish, your presence here creates complications." Elowen set down her spoon. "Of course, if Duke Aldrich discovers I am alive and under your protection, he may view it as a political challenge." Ronan nodded, impressed by her quick understanding. "Exactly so. Which leaves us with a question, Lady Elowen." He leaned forward slightly. "What do you wish to happen now?" The directness of the question was refreshing after years of court intrigue and hidden meanings. Elowen considered her answer carefully. "I wish to reclaim my dignity, Your Majesty. Beyond that—" She paused, the full weight of her situation suddenly overwhelming. She had no home, no family, no resources of her own. "I confess I haven't thought beyond survival." Ronan's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then perhaps we should start there. You are safe here, Lady Elowen. You have my word on that. The rest we will determine in time." As their eyes met across the table, Elowen felt something stir within her, a tentative hope, fragile as a newly forming bud. For the first time since being dragged into the desert, she allowed herself to believe that perhaps her story wasn't ending, but beginning anew. Dawn broke over Castle Caerwyn, painting the stone battlements with hues of gold and amber. Elowen stood on the small balcony adjoining her chambers, watching as the fortress came to life. A week had passed since her rescue, a week of healing, of regaining her strength, and of gradually acclimating to her new surroundings. The sound of trumpets drew her attention to the main courtyard, where King Ronan was assembling his council. Even from a distance, his commanding presence was unmistakable as he strode across the yard, his royal blue cloak billowing behind him. Guards snapped to attention as he passed, their armor gleaming in the morning light. A knock at her door interrupted her observations. "Enter," she called, turning from the balcony. Lady Morgana appeared, her silver-streaked hair neatly braided around her head like a crown. "His Majesty requests your presence in the council chamber, Lady Elowen. If you feel well, enough to attend." Surprise flickered across Elowen's face. "The council chamber? I'm not sure I understand." Lady Morgana's expression remained neutral, though her eyes held a hint of something. Respect, perhaps. "The king believes your knowledge of Duke Aldrich might prove valuable to today's discussions." She paused, then added more softly, "Winthorpe's activities at our borders have become concerning." A cold weight settled in Elowen's stomach. So soon? She had hoped for more time before her past life collided with her uncertain present. "Of course," she replied, smoothing down the front of her dress. "Another gift from the king, this one a deep burgundy with delicate gold embroidery at the sleeves. Please lead the way." The council chamber was an imposing room dominated by a massive oak table. Maps covered much of its surface, weighted down with small metal figures representing troops and fortifications. Around the table stood 6 men and 1 woman, all attired in the finery of high nobility, their expressions grave as they discussed matters of state. All conversation ceased when Elowen entered. King Ronan, seated at the head of the table, rose to acknowledge her arrival. "Lady Elowen, thank you for joining us," he said, his deep voice carrying easily in the stone chamber. "Please, be seated." He gestured to an empty chair near his own. As she took her place, Ronan addressed the council. "For those who have not yet been introduced, this is Lady Elowen, formerly of Winthorpe. She has first-hand knowledge of Duke Aldrich and his court that may prove invaluable to our current deliberations." An older man with a heavily lined face and a silver beard stroked his chin thoughtfully. "With all due respect, Your Majesty, can we trust the testimony of Duke Aldrich's cast-off wife? Her perspective may be colored by personal grievances." Before Ronan could respond, Elowen met the man's gaze directly. "You must be Lord Talbot," she said calmly. "My husband mentioned you often. He considered you his most formidable opponent in the annual tournaments, though he would never admit it publicly." Lord Talbot's eyes widened slightly in surprise. "My Lord," Elowen continued, her voice steady, "I harbor no illusions about my situation. Yes, I have personal grievances against Duke Aldrich. He left me to die in a desert based on false accusations. But I also lived as his wife for 10 years. I know his strategies, his allies, his weaknesses. I know which advisors he trusts and which he merely tolerates." She glanced around the table. "Whether you trust my motives is your prerogative, but I assure you, my knowledge is both accurate and extensive." A tense silence followed her words. Then, unexpectedly, the lone woman at the table, a stern-faced lady with striking amber eyes, let out a short laugh. "Well said, Lady Elowen." She inclined her head respectfully. "I am Lady Ravenna, commander of the King's Special Forces. I, for one, believe information from an insider is precisely what we need right now." King Ronan nodded in agreement. "Indeed, let us proceed." He gestured to a man standing in the shadows, who stepped forward and unrolled a fresh map on the table. "Our spies report increased military activity along the eastern border of Winthorpe. Duke Aldrich appears to be gathering forces, ostensibly for training exercises, but the timing is suspicious." The spymaster, a thin man with penetrating dark eyes, spoke next. "We've also intercepted communications suggesting Duke Aldrich is seeking alliances with the mountain clans. He's offering gold and land in exchange for warriors. That matches his usual strategy," Elowen interjected, studying the map closely. "Aldrich prefers to use mercenary forces for his first wave of attacks, saving his own troops for when the enemy is already weakened." Lord Talbot leaned forward, his initial skepticism apparently set aside. "You speak as though you expect an attack, my lady. Do you believe Duke Aldrich intends war with Caerwyn?" Elowen considered the question carefully. "Duke Aldrich has always coveted expansion. Your eastern provinces are rich in resources he lacks, particularly the iron mines. She traced a finger along the border on the map. Moreover, he believes, incorrectly, that King Ronan's preference for diplomatic solutions over military ones indicates weakness. A grave miscalculation, Ronan commented, his voice carrying a hint of steel beneath its measured calm. Indeed, Elowen agreed, but one consistent with his character. Aldrich respects only displays of force. He interprets restraint as fear. Lady Ravenna tapped her fingers thoughtfully on the table. What of his personal guard? We've heard they're exceptionally loyal. Bought loyalty, Elowen clarified. He pays them handsomely and allows them liberties that other lords might find objectionable. But they're not invincible. They train exclusively for offensive combat and are less effective when forced into defensive positions. As the discussion continued, Elowen found herself speaking, with increasing confidence, mapping out the complex web of alliances and enmities that defined Winthorpe's political landscape. The council members listened attentively, their initial reservations giving way to grudging respect, as her insights proved both detailed and strategically valuable. Throughout it all, she was acutely aware of King Ronan's presence beside her, his quiet authority, the sharp intelligence in his gray eyes as he absorbed and analyzed each piece of information. Unlike Aldrich, who dominated conversations through intimidation, Ronan led by example, encouraging open discussion while deftly guiding it toward productive conclusions. After 2 hours of intense deliberation, Ronan called the meeting to a close. We will double the patrols along the eastern border and accelerate the fortification of the mountain passes. Lord Talbot, see to the training of additional archers. Lady Ravenna, prepare your scouts for extended reconnaissance missions. As the council members filed out of the chamber, Ronan gestured for Elowen to remain. When they were alone, he turned to her, his expression thoughtful. You have my gratitude, Lady Elowen. Your contributions today were invaluable. She inclined her head. I am glad to be of service, Your Majesty. After your kindness, it is the least I can offer. Ronan studied her for a moment, his gaze penetrating. This cannot have been easy for you, discussing the man who betrayed you so callously, analyzing his strategies as though he were merely another adversary on a chessboard. The observation caught her off guard. Aldrich had never once considered how his actions might affect her emotionally. Such consideration would never have occurred to him. It is complicated, she admitted. But in some ways, speaking of it, using my knowledge to potentially thwart his ambitions, feels like reclaiming a small measure of control. Ronan nodded slowly. I understand. He paused, seeming to weigh his next words carefully. Would you consider joining us for future council sessions? Your insights could prove crucial in the days ahead. Elowen felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose, of value beyond her role as a nobleman's wife. I would be honored, Your Majesty. As they walked together toward the door, Ronan added, and perhaps when time permits, you might show me these defensive weaknesses you mentioned in Aldrich's personal guard. I find myself curious about your tactical knowledge. It's uncommon among noblewomen. A small smile touched Elowen's lips. My father believed daughters should understand strategy as well as sons. He taught me chess before I could properly hold the pieces. The memory brought a bittersweet pang. Duke Aldrich discouraged such interests after our marriage. He preferred a more traditional wife. Then Duke Aldrich was a fool in more ways than one, Ronan replied, his tone matter-of-fact rather than flattering. Intelligence is a resource too valuable to waste, regardless of its source. Meanwhile, in Winthorpe Castle, Duke Aldrich paced. The length of his private study, rage barely contained beneath his carefully cultivated facade of control. Before him stood Sir Malcolm, his scarred face even paler than usual as he delivered his report. You're certain of this? Aldrich demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. Yes, my lord. Our informant in Caerwyn confirms it. Lady Elowen is alive and has been granted sanctuary by King Ronan himself. Aldrich slammed his fist down on his desk, sending a silver inkpot clattering to the floor. That meddling, self-righteous... He cut himself off, taking a deep breath to regain his composure. "How much does she know of our plans for the eastern border?" Sir Malcolm hesitated. "She attended all of your strategy sessions for the past 3 years, my lord. She was often present when you met with your military advisors." "As a silent ornament, not a participant," Aldrich snapped, though a flicker of doubt crossed his features. Elowen had always been intelligent. It was one of the qualities that had first attracted him to her, before he realized that a clever wife could be more liability than asset. "Regardless," he continued, his mind already calculating this new variable, "we must adapt our strategy. Send assassins to Caerwyn, discreet ones. I want her eliminated before she can reveal anything truly damaging. And if they fail, my lord?" Aldrich's lips curved into a cold smile. "Then we accelerate our plans. King Ronan has made a grave mistake in sheltering my runaway wife. It provides the perfect pretext for more direct action." He moved to the window, gazing out at the training yards where his soldiers drilled in precise formation. After all, what honorable husband wouldn't seek to reclaim his beloved wife from foreign captivity? It's almost poetic, a rescue mission that will coincidentally secure us those iron mines we've been coveting. Back in Caerwyn, unaware of the deadly plans being laid against her, Elowen stood in a secluded corner of the castle gardens. The afternoon sun warmed her face as she contemplated her strange new circumstances. For the first time in a decade, she felt seen, not as an extension of her husband, but as herself. "Lady Elowen?" She turned to find Lady Ravenna approaching, her military bearing evident even in the simple blue tunic and leather breeches she wore off duty. "I hope I'm not interrupting your solitude," the commander said, "but I wanted to speak with you privately." Elowen gestured to the stone bench beside her. "Not at all. Please join me." As Lady Ravenna sat, Elowen noticed calluses on her hands, the marks of someone who trained regularly with weapons. "You commanded the special forces with remarkable authority." "In the council meeting," Elowen observed. "I've rarely seen a woman in such a position." Lady Ravenna's amber eyes gleamed with pride. "King Ronan judges capability, not gender. It's one of many reasons his people are so loyal." She studied Elowen thoughtfully. "Which brings me to my purpose in seeking you out. I understand you have knowledge of strategy and warfare, yet no means to defend yourself personally." Elowen tensed slightly. "That's correct." "I would like to change that," Lady Ravenna stated simply. "With the king's permission, of course." "You want to train me?" The commander nodded. "Basic self-defense at minimum. Duke Aldrich will not be pleased to learn you survived, Lady Elowen. I believe it would be prudent for you to have some means of protecting yourself." The offer took Elowen by surprise, but as she considered it, a sense of determination rose within her. She had been powerless once, left to die at her husband's command. Never again. "I would be grateful for such instruction, Lady Ravenna," she replied, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "When do we begin?" The great hall of Castle Caerwyn buzzed with the excited chatter of nobles and dignitaries. Elaborate tapestries depicting the kingdom's storied history hung from the high stone walls, while hundreds of candles in ornate iron chandeliers cast a warm glow over the assembled guests. Tonight marked the autumn equinox feast, an important diplomatic occasion where alliances were strengthened and grievances addressed under the guise of celebration. Elowen stood at the edge of the crowd, observing the proceedings with careful attention. 3 weeks had passed since her first council meeting, and in that time she had gradually established herself as a valuable advisor to King Ronan. Her emerald gown, more elaborate than those she had worn previously, marked her rising status in the court. The bodice was embroidered with silver thread in patterns reminiscent of intertwining vines, while the sleeves fell in graceful folds to her wrists. "You look lost in thought, Lady Elowen." She turned to find King Ronan approaching, resplendent in formal attire. His midnight blue doublet was embellished with silver wolves, his family's emblem, and a simple crown of silver set with sapphires rested upon his dark hair. "Merely observing, Your Majesty," she replied with a small curtsy. Court gatherings reveal much about the underlying currents of power. A hint of amusement touched Ronan's eyes. Indeed they do. And what have you observed this evening? Elowen considered for a moment. The ambassador from the coastal provinces speaks confidently, but his hands betray anxiety. The Earl of Whitecrest has positioned himself strategically near your chancellor, undoubtedly hoping to discuss the timber rights he's been pursuing. She nodded subtly toward a cluster of nobles. And those 3 lords from the northern territories are displeased about something. They've barely touched their wine and keep exchanging glances. Ronan's eyebrows rose slightly. Your assessment is remarkably accurate. You would have made an exceptional spy master. A role Duke Aldrich would never have considered appropriate for a woman, she said, a trace of bitterness creeping into her voice. His loss, Ronan stated simply. Come walk with me. There are several people I'd like you to meet. As they moved through the crowd, Elowen was acutely aware of the curious glances directed their way. Though her presence at court had been explained as that of a political refugee, rumors inevitably circulated about the mysterious lady who had so quickly gained the king's confidence. Ronan led her to a group of distinguished-looking visitors. Lady Elowen, may I present Lord Magnus, ambassador from the Eastern Alliance. Lord Magnus, this is Lady Elowen, my special advisor on Winthorpe affairs. The ambassador, a tall man with a neatly trimmed salt and pepper beard, bowed respectfully. Lady Elowen, your reputation precedes you. They say you have provided our king with invaluable insights into Duke Aldrich's strategies. His Majesty is generous in his assessment of my contributions. Elowen replied diplomatically. Not generous, accurate, Ronan corrected. Lady Elowen's intelligence regarding Winthorpe's military movements along the eastern border allowed us to strengthen our defenses before Duke Aldrich could exploit any weaknesses. Lord Magnus nodded thoughtfully. Most impressive, and most fortunate that you found your way to Caerwyn. Fortune had little to do with it, Ronan said, his voice taking on a harder edge. Lady Elowen was abandoned in the Sindral Desert on her husband's orders. It was by mere chance that I learned of this atrocity in time to intervene. The ambassador's expression darkened. Such actions reflect poorly on Duke Aldrich's honor. The Eastern Alliance will take note of this. After several more introductions, a servant approached with a tray of wine goblets. As Ronan engaged in conversation with a visiting merchant prince, Elowen accepted a goblet from the servant, a young man she didn't recognize. Something in his demeanor struck her as odd. His eyes darted nervously and his hands trembled slightly. As he offered her the wine, the training sessions with Lady Ravenna had sharpened more than just Elowen's physical reflexes. 3 weeks of daily lessons in self-defense had also heightened her awareness of potential threats. Following her instinct, she pretended to take a sip while actually letting the wine merely touch her lips. A strange, bitter taste registered immediately. Elowen's heart raced, but she maintained her composed expression, casually lowering the goblet. Your Majesty, she said, turning to Ronan, I believe this vintage deserves your expert opinion. She offered him the goblet with a meaningful look. Ronan, perceptive as always, caught the subtle warning in her eyes. He reached for the goblet but deliberately knocked it from her hand, sending the dark liquid splashing across the stone floor. How clumsy of me, he said smoothly. Please, allow me to request another. He signaled to his personal guard, who had been standing discreetly nearby. With a quick, almost imperceptible gesture, Ronan indicated the retreating servant. The guard moved swiftly through the crowd in pursuit. Leaning closer to Elowen, Ronan spoke in a low voice. What did you notice? The wine had a bitter undertaste, she murmured. And the servant. I hadn't seen him before, and he seemed unusually nervous. Ronan's expression hardened, though he maintained a pleasant demeanor for the benefit of those watching. It seems Duke Aldrich has made his first move. He placed a protective hand at the small of her back, guiding her away from the curious onlookers. We should withdraw to somewhere more private to discuss this. They had barely reached the edge of the great hall when Sir Gareth, Ronan's most trusted knight approached with urgent news. "The servant has been apprehended, Your Majesty." He confessed. Immediately, he was paid to poison Lady Elowen's wine. "By whom?" Ronan demanded, though the answer was obvious. "He claims he doesn't know his employer's identity. The payment and instructions came through intermediaries." Sir Gareth hesitated. "But he did say the poison was meant to cause a slow, painful death that would appear to be a wasting illness." Elowen felt a cold shiver run down her spine. The method was signature Aldrich. He preferred his vengeance to be prolonged when possible. Ronan's jaw tightened. "Double the guard, check all servants who have been hired within the past month, and bring Lady Ravenna to my private council chamber. Immediately." He turned to Elowen, genuine concern evident in his eyes. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her heart still raced. "Yes." Thankfully, Lady Ravenna's lessons included identifying signs of poisons and toxins. "I'll have to commend her on her thoroughness," Ronan said with grim humor. "Come, let's continue this discussion away from prying eyes." In the privacy of the king's council chamber, Elowen paced while they waited for Lady Ravenna to arrive. The reality of Aldrich's attempt on her life had shaken her more than she cared to admit. For a decade she had lived with his emotional cruelty, but this direct attack on her life, even after he had already tried to kill her once, revealed the true depth of his malice. "He won't stop," she said quietly. "Not until I'm dead." Ronan, who had been standing by the fireplace deep in thought, turned to her. "Aldrich has made a grave miscalculation. Attempting to assassinate someone under my protection, at my own feast no less, is an act of war. That may be exactly what he wants," Elowen pointed out. "A pretext to mobilize his forces." The door opened, and Lady Ravenna entered, her usual military attire replaced by formal wear for the feast, though she still wore a ceremonial sword at her side. "Your Majesty, I came as soon as I heard. Is Lady Elowen unharmed?" "Thanks to her quick thinking and your training, yes," Ronan confirmed. "But this attempt makes it clear that Duke Aldrich's spies have infiltrated the castle. We need to tighten security immediately." Lady Ravenna nodded grimly. "I'll personally oversee the investigation into how the assassin gained access to the feast. In the meantime, I recommend assigning Lady Elowen a personal guard, someone beyond reproach." "I agree," Ronan said. "Select your most trusted soldier for this task." Elowen, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke up. "While I appreciate your concern for my safety, I would prefer not to live as a prisoner, constantly shadowed by guards." Ronan's expression softened slightly. "It would be temporary, Lady Elowen, until we can be certain the threat has been neutralized." "And how long might that be?" she challenged, meeting his gaze directly. "Aldrich is nothing if not patient in his vendettas." An unexpected tension filled the room as their eyes locked. After a moment, Ronan sighed. "You have a point. Security measures alone won't solve the fundamental problem." He turned to Lady Ravenna. "Continue with the investigation and increase general security. But for now, we'll hold off on assigning a permanent guard to Lady Elowen." Once Lady Ravenna had departed to carry out her orders, an uncomfortable silence settled between Elowen and Ronan. She was the first to break it. "I apologize if I seemed ungrateful, Your Majesty. I assure you, I deeply appreciate all you've done for me." Ronan shook his head. "No apology necessary. Your desire for freedom is entirely understandable, especially given your recent captivity." He moved to a side table and poured 2 goblets of wine from a decanter he kept for private meetings. After a moment's hesitation, he handed one to Elowen with the ghost of a smile. "I can personally vouch for this vintage." The small joke broke the tension, and Elowen accepted the wine with a grateful nod. "To freedom, then," she said, raising her goblet slightly. "To freedom," Ronan echoed, "and to justice." As they drank, Elowen studied the king's face in the warm firelight. There was something in his expression, a complexity of emotion that intrigued her. For all his strength and authority, there was a vulnerability in his eyes that Aldrich had never possessed. "May I ask you something, Your Majesty?" she ventured. "Of course. Why did you really save me that day in the desert?" The truth, not the diplomatic answer. Ronan considered her question for a long moment. swirling the wine in his goblet thoughtfully. "The diplomatic answer and the truth are not so different," he said finally. "I do believe that a king's duty is to protect the innocent and punish injustice." He set his goblet down and moved closer to her, his gaze direct and unwavering. But there was something more. When the nomad described a noblewoman abandoned in the desert, something called to me. I can't explain it more precisely than that. It was as though fate itself demanded I change course. The honesty of his answer caught Elowen off guard. She had expected a political explanation, not this admission of intuition and feeling. "And do you regret that decision?" she asked softly, "now that it has brought complications and threats to your court?" Ronan's expression grew serious. Not for a moment. His voice lowered, taking on a warmth that sent an unexpected shiver through her. "Some complications are worth facing, lady." Elowen. The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. For a brief, charged moment, something unspoken passed between them, something that transcended their roles as king and advisor, rescuer and rescued. The spell was broken by a sharp knock at the door. Ronan stepped back, his expression returning to its usual composed authority. "Enter," he called. Sir Gareth appeared, his face grave. "Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but we've received urgent news from the eastern border. Duke Aldrich's forces have begun mobilizing in greater numbers than previously reported." Ronan nodded grimly. "It seems our friend from Winthorpe is accelerating his plans." He glanced at Elowen. "We should return to the feast. Our extended absence will be noted. But tomorrow, we'll need to convene the full council." As they walked back toward the great hall, Elowen's mind raced with the implications of Aldrich's latest moves. The assassination attempt, the troop movements. They spoke of a man growing desperate, perhaps even reckless. "Your Majesty," she said, quietly as they paused outside the great hall's entrance. "Whatever comes next, I want you to know that I am prepared to face it. Aldrich may have tried to break me, but in doing so, he only revealed my true strength." Ronan studied her for a moment, admiration evident in his gaze. "I believe you, Lady Elowen, and I promise you this. Duke Aldrich will learn that his greatest mistake wasn't in trying to kill you. It was in failing to recognize your worth." With those words hanging between them, they rejoined the feast, each acutely aware that the diplomatic games being played within the hall were merely a prelude to the very real conflict brewing beyond Caerwyn's walls. A month had passed since the assassination attempt at the autumn equinox feast. Winter was settling over Caerwyn, dusting the castle's towers with delicate frost and turning the breath of guards on the battlements to silver mist. Within the fortress walls, life had adjusted to a new state of heightened vigilance. Additional patrols, stricter protocols for visitors, and more thorough vetting of servants. For Elowen, these changes were merely the visible manifestations of a deeper transformation, taking place within the court, where once she had been viewed as a curiosity, the discarded wife of an enemy lord, she was now recognized as a valued advisor to the king. Nobles who had initially greeted her with polite indifference now sought her opinions on matters of state. Servants who had once whispered behind her back now bowed with genuine respect. On this particular morning, Elowen stood in the castle's great assembly hall, watching as King Ronan presided over the formal introduction of new knights into his service. The ceremony was steeped in tradition. Young men kneeling before their sovereign, swearing oaths of fealty, receiving the symbolic tap of the royal sword upon their shoulders. What struck Elowen most, however, was the genuine warmth in Ronan's interactions with each knight. Unlike Aldrich, who viewed such ceremonies as tedious obligations, Ronan spoke to each man individually, acknowledging their unique qualities and contributions. As the last knight rose, newly anointed into service, the assembled court broke into respectful applause. Ronan caught Elowen's eye across the hall and offered a subtle nod of acknowledgement before turning to address the court. "Lords and ladies of Caerwyn," he began, his deep voice carrying effortlessly through the vast space. "Today we welcome these worthy men into our service. But we also gather for another purpose." His expression grew more serious. "As many of you are aware, our eastern borders face increasing pressure from Winthorpe. Duke Aldrich's forces continue to amass, and our scouts report concerning movements near the mountain passes. A murmur rippled through the assembly. Ronan raised a hand, and silence instantly returned. I have called this gathering to announce two significant decisions. First, we will immediately double the garrison at Eastwatch Fortress and reinforce the mountain outposts with additional archers and supplies. Nods of approval from the military commanders punctuated this declaration. Second, Ronan continued, his gaze sweeping the room, I am appointing Lady Elowen as my official envoy to the Eastern Alliance. Her knowledge of Winthorpe's internal politics and military strategies makes her uniquely qualified to secure the support we may need in the coming months. Elowen felt the weight of dozens of eyes turned toward her. Though Ronan had discussed this appointment with her privately, the public announcement still caught her somewhat off guard. The Eastern Alliance, a confederation of smaller kingdoms along Cerwyn's northeastern border, represented a crucial potential ally against Aldrich's expansionist ambitions. Lady Elowen, Ronan said, gesturing for her to approach the throne, will you accept this responsibility on behalf of Cerwyn? Walking forward with measured steps, Elowen felt a strange sense of déjà vu. How many times had she crossed similar halls in Winthorpe, approaching Aldrich's throne? Yet everything about this moment was different. The genuine respect in Ronan's eyes, the assignment based on her capabilities rather than her status as a nobleman's wife, the underlying current of something unspoken yet powerful between them. She dropped into a graceful curtsy before the throne. I am honored by your Majesty's trust and will serve Cerwyn with all my ability. Ronan nodded, satisfaction evident in his expression. You will depart in 3 days' time with a suitable escort. Lady Ravenna will oversee the security arrangements for your journey. As the formal proceedings concluded and the court began to disperse, Lord Chancellor Harrington, a thin, scholarly man who served as Ronan's chief diplomatic advisor, approached Elowen with a concerned expression. A word, if I may, Lady Elowen, he requested, bowing slightly. Of course, Lord Chancellor. He guided her to a quiet alcove away from the dispersing crowd. I mean no disrespect, he began, his voice lowered, but I must express certain reservations about your appointment. Elowen maintained a neutral expression. I'm listening. While your knowledge of Winthorpe is invaluable, sending you as envoy to the Eastern Alliance places you in considerable danger. His gray eyebrows drew together in genuine concern. Duke Aldrich has already made one attempt on your life within these walls. Outside them, you would be significantly more vulnerable. I appreciate your concern, Lord Chancellor, Elowen replied carefully. But sometimes the most effective move in a chess game is also the most unexpected. Duke Aldrich believes me to be cowering behind Cerwyn's walls. My emergence as an active diplomat will destabilize his assumptions. Harrington studied her for a moment, surprise and reluctant admiration mingling in his expression. You speak like a strategist, my lady. I was raised by one, she reminded him with a small smile. And I spent a decade observing another, albeit a less honorable one. The Chancellor nodded slowly. Very well. In that case, I would be pleased to brief you on the current political climate within the Alliance. The lords of the Eastern Territories can be complicated in their allegiances. I would welcome your insights, Lord Chancellor. Later that afternoon, Elowen found herself in the royal gardens, which even in winter maintained a stark beauty. Snow dusted the dormant rose bushes, and frozen fountain, creating a landscape of crystalline white broken only by the dark, twisted branches of ancient oak trees. I thought I might find you here, came Ronan's voice from behind her. She turned to find the king approaching, having exchanged his formal regalia for more practical attire. A heavy cloak lined with wolf fur over a simple tunic and breeches. Without the crown and formal doublet, he seemed somehow more approachable, though no less commanding. The gardens help me think, Your Majesty, she explained. Even in winter there's a certain peace to be found here. Indeed, he came to stand beside her, gazing out at the snow-covered landscape. I often come here myself when council meetings become too contentious. A comfortable silence settled between them before Ronan spoke again. Chancellor Harrington spoke with you after the announcement. He did, Elowen confirmed. He expressed concern about the dangers of my mission, as did Lady Ravenna and Lord Talbot and half my advisory council, Ronan admitted with a hint of wry amusement. They seem to think I'm sending you into unnecessary peril. Elowen turned to face him directly. And what do you think, Your Majesty? Ronan's gray eyes met hers, intense and searching. I think you are far more capable than anyone, including Aldrich, ever gave you credit for. I think this mission serves both strategic and personal purposes. He paused. And I think you need this opportunity to reclaim your voice on the diplomatic stage. His perception surprised her, though perhaps it shouldn't have. In their many conversations over the past weeks, Ronan had repeatedly demonstrated an uncanny ability to understand her thoughts, sometimes before she had fully articulated them herself. You're right, she acknowledged, though I admit the prospect is somewhat daunting. It's been many years since I represented anyone's interests but my husband's. You'll have Chancellor Harrington's briefings and Lady Ravenna's most trusted guards, Ronan assured her. But more importantly, you'll have your own intelligence and insight. He hesitated, then added more softly, and you'll have my complete confidence. Something in his tone made her heart beat faster. That means more than you know, Your Majesty. They stood there for a moment, the unspoken tension between them growing almost palpable. Snowflakes began to fall gently around them, catching in Elowen's auburn hair like tiny stars. Ronan reached out, his movement almost unconscious, and brushed a snowflake from her cheek. The brief contact sent a warmth through Elowen that had nothing to do with the heavy cloak around her shoulders. Ronan, he said quietly, when we're alone, I would prefer you use my name. The simple request carried weight far beyond the words themselves. It represented a shift, from monarch and subject to something more personal, more equal. Ronan, she repeated, testing the name on her lips. It felt both foreign and somehow right. He smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious features. Much better. The moment was interrupted by approaching footsteps on the garden path. They stepped apart instinctively as Lady Ravenna appeared, her military bearing evident even beneath her winter cloak. Your Majesty, she began, then noticed Elowen. Lady Elowen, forgive the intrusion, but the scouts have returned from the eastern border with urgent reports. Ronan's expression immediately shifted back to that of the focused king. What news? Duke Aldrich has begun recruiting from the mountain clans, as Lady Elowen predicted. But there's more. He's also sent envoys to the coastal kingdoms, seeking naval support. Elowen frowned. Naval support? That's unexpected. Winthorpe has always focused on land campaigns. Perhaps he anticipates we might seek aid from across the narrow sea, Ronan suggested, his tactical mind already analyzing the implications. Or perhaps, Elowen said slowly, a disturbing thought taking shape. He's planning to blockade the eastern ports. If he controls both the mountain passes and the sea approaches, we would be effectively isolated from our potential allies. Ronan finished grimly. Your mission to the Eastern Alliance has just become even more critical, Elowen. Lady Ravenna glanced between them, noting the use of Elowen's given name but maintaining her professional demeanor. I've taken the liberty of selecting your escort, my lady. 20 of my best fighters disguised as a merchant caravan. You'll travel through the northern passes, longer, but safer than the direct route. Thank you, Lady Ravenna, Elowen replied. When can they be ready to depart? Tomorrow, if necessary, came the efficient response. Ronan nodded decisively. Make it so. The sooner Lady Elowen reaches the Alliance, the better our chances of securing their support before Aldrich can interfere. As Lady Ravenna departed to make the arrangements, Ronan turned back to Elowen, concern evident in his eyes despite his authoritative tone. Are you certain you're prepared for this? He asked quietly. Once you leave these walls, I understand the risks, she assured him. But as you said yourself, this is an opportunity, not just for Caerwyn, but for me personally. She straightened her shoulders, resolve hardening her voice. Aldrich sought to silence me permanently. There would be a certain poetic justice in my voice being the one to rally an alliance against him. Ronan studied her for a long moment, admiration clear in his gaze. Be careful, Elowen. Cerwyn needs you. He paused, then added in a lower voice, I need you. The simple declaration hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning neither was quite ready to fully acknowledge. I will return, she promised. And when I do, we will face whatever comes next. Together. As they walked back toward the castle, snow continuing to fall gently around them, Elowen reflected on the strange path that had led her here. From abandoned wife left to die in the desert to diplomatic envoy representing a kingdom not her own. From a marriage of political convenience to whatever this unspoken connection with Ronan might become. For the first time in many years, she found herself looking toward the future not with resignation or fear, but with genuine hope. The merchant caravan wound its way through the narrow mountain pass, 20 heavily armed guards disguised as traders surrounding a central wagon where Elowen traveled. 6 days had passed since their departure from Cerwyn, 6 days of increasingly difficult terrain as they followed the less traveled northern route to the Eastern Alliance territories. Inside the wagon, Elowen studied maps by lantern light, committing to memory the complex political geography of the Alliance. Unlike Cerwyn's unified kingdom under Ronan's rule, the Alliance consisted of 5 semi-autonomous territories, each with its own ruling family, united by mutual defense treaties and trade agreements. My lady, called Bryce, the captain of her escort and Lady Ravenna's second-in-command, will reach the border checkpoint by nightfall. Elowen set aside her maps and pulled back the wagon's canvas covering to speak with him. The young captain rode alongside, his alert eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Though only 30, Bryce had earned his position through exceptional skill and loyalty. Will we face difficulties at the crossing? She asked. Shouldn't, Bryce replied, adjusting his position in the saddle. Lord Harrington's diplomatic seals should ensure smooth passage, but Duke Aldrich may have agents watching the borders, Elowen finished, having already anticipated this concern. Bryce nodded grimly. Precisely why we're taking this route, my lady. Fewer eyes, though the terrain is less forgiving. As if to emphasize his point, the wagon lurched over a particularly rough patch of road, forcing Elowen to brace herself against the wooden frame. Once we're across, Bryce continued, we'll make for Highcrest. Lord Devereux's territory is the strongest of the Alliance and the most strategically positioned to assist Cerwyn. Elowen nodded, recalling the briefings. Lord Devereux, a shrewd, pragmatic leader in his early 50s, controlled the most significant iron mines in the region, as well as key mountain passes that would be crucial in any conflict with Winthorpe. And Lord Devereux's feelings toward Duke Aldrich? She inquired. Cool at best, Bryce confirmed. There was some dispute over border territories about 5 years back. Nothing that led to open conflict, but enough to create lingering distrust. Good, Elowen murmured. That gives us something to work with. By the time they reached the border checkpoint, a stone fortress straddling the narrow pass, darkness had fallen. Torches illuminated the fortress walls, where Alliance guards in distinctive gray and red uniforms kept watch. As Bryce had predicted, Lord Harrington's diplomatic seals ensured them passage with minimal questioning, though Elowen remained hidden within the wagon until they were safely through. No sense in revealing her identity any sooner than necessary. They made camp an hour's ride inside Alliance territory, in a sheltered valley that offered both protection from the bitter mountain winds and a defensible position. As the guards established a perimeter, Elowen joined Bryce by the main campfire. 2 more days to Highcrest, he informed her, offering a tin cup of hot tea. The roads improve once we're out of the mountains. And what news of Cerwyn? She asked, wrapping her fingers around the warm cup. Despite her layers of wool and fur, the mountain cold seeped into her bones. Bryce hesitated. The last messenger caught up with us this morning while you were resting. Duke Aldrich has moved additional troops to the eastern border. No direct aggression yet, but he's positioning himself, Elowen said, her voice hardening, waiting for the right moment. King Ronan has responded in kind, Bryce assured her. Eastwatch Fortress is fully garrisoned, and Lady Ravenna has deployed scouts throughout the borderlands. Elowen nodded, though concern still tightened her chest. She had left Cerwyn knowing war was likely inevitable. but the reality of Aldrich's movements made the threat more immediate. "We should reach Highcrest by midday after tomorrow," Bryce continued. "Lord Devereux has been notified of a diplomatic envoy from Caerwyn, though not specifically of your identity." "Good. The element of surprise may work in our favor." 2 days later, as promised, the caravan crested a hill to reveal Highcrest, a sprawling fortress city built into the side of a mountain. Unlike Caerwyn's elegant stone towers, Highcrest was a more utilitarian construction, its granite walls designed to withstand both the harsh mountain weather and potential sieges. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, evidence of the smithies and forges that had made the city famous for its metalwork. As they approached the main gates, Elowen shed her traveler's cloak, revealing the formal diplomatic attire she had donned that morning, a gown of deep blue and silver, Caerwyn's colors, with her auburn hair arranged in an elegant style befitting her station as royal envoy. The guards at the gate straightened visibly when they saw the Caerwyn banner unfurled at the head of the caravan. "State your business," the lead guard called. Bryce rode forward. "We bear a diplomatic mission from His Majesty, King Ronan of Caerwyn, to Lord Devereux of Highcrest." The gate swung open, and an honor guard emerged to escort them through the city. As they wound their way through narrow streets toward the fortress at Highcrest's summit, Elowen observed the bustling activity around them. Blacksmiths hammered. At glowing metal, merchants hawked wares from crowded stalls, and everywhere was the sense of a society defined by industry and pragmatism. Lord Devereux received them in his great hall, a cavernous space dominated by a massive hearth and decorated with weapons and shields rather than the tapestries that adorned Caerwyn's walls. The Lord himself matched his surroundings, a broad-shouldered man with a thick gray beard and calloused hands that spoke of his background as a blacksmith's son before inheriting his title. "Caerwyn sends us an envoy," he announced as Elowen stepped forward. "Though I admit I expected Chancellor Harrington or perhaps Lord Talbot." His shrewd eyes assessed her. "You have me at a disadvantage, my lady." Elowen performed a perfect court curtsy. Lady Elowen of Northumbria, acting as King Ronan's personal envoy on matters concerning Winthorpe. A ripple of surprise ran through the assembled court. Lord Devereux's eyebrows rose slightly. "Elowen of Northumbria? Duke Aldrich's wife?" "Former wife," she corrected, her voice steady despite the flutter of anxiety in her chest. This was the moment of truth, whether her identity would help or hinder her mission. "I had heard rumors of your departure from Winthorpe," Devereux said carefully, "though the details were unclear." "I'm sure they were," Elowen replied. "Duke Aldrich prefers his dishonorable acts to remain shrouded in mystery. Perhaps we might discuss the matter more privately?" Devereux studied her for a long moment, curiosity evident in his expression. "Indeed, my private council chamber would be more appropriate for such discussions." He gestured to his steward. "See that Lady Elowen's escort is properly accommodated, and have refreshments brought to the East Tower." 20 minutes later, Elowen found herself seated across from Lord Devereux at a heavy oak table in a circular chamber with windows overlooking the surrounding mountains. A serving girl had brought mulled wine and freshly baked bread before quietly withdrawing. "Now then," Devereux said, leaning back in his chair, "I think it's time you explained how Duke Aldrich's wife came to be King Ronan's envoy." Elowen took a deliberate sip of wine, gathering her thoughts. "My lord, I will tell you a story of betrayal, survival, and opportunity, both mine and potentially yours." Without embellishment or self-pity, she recounted the events that had led her to this moment. Aldrich's false accusations, her abandonment in the desert, Ronan's rescue, and the growing threat Winthorpe now posed to both Caerwyn and the Eastern Alliance. Devereux listened without interruption, his weathered face revealing nothing of his thoughts. When she finished, he remained silent for several long moments. "A remarkable tale," he said finally, "and one that, I suspect, contains more truth than the official dispatches from Winthorpe claiming you eloped with a lover." Elowen couldn't suppress a bitter laugh. Of course that would be his story. Aldrich would never admit to attempted murder. "No, I imagine not." Devereux stroked his beard thoughtfully. But fascinating as your personal history may be, Lady Elowen, it doesn't explain why King Ronan sent you specifically as his envoy. Doesn't it? She countered. I lived as Aldrich's wife for a decade. I attended his councils, observed his strategies, learned the workings of his mind. There is no one in Caerwyn, perhaps no one anywhere, who better understands the threat. He poses. Devereux's eyes narrowed slightly. You were party to his military councils? That seems unusual. Aldrich considered me an ornament, not a participant, Elowen explained. He never imagined I was paying attention, much less understanding. It was a miscalculation that now works to Caerwyn's advantage, and potentially to yours. And what advantage does Caerwyn offer the Alliance? Devereux asked bluntly. Aldrich hasn't moved against us directly. Yet, Elowen emphasized. He hasn't moved against you yet. But make no mistake, my lord. If Caerwyn falls, Highcrest will be next. Aldrich covets your iron mines almost as much as he desires Caerwyn's fertile lands. She leaned forward, her voice taking on an urgency she didn't have to feign. He's already courting the mountain clans with promises of land and gold. He's seeking naval allies to potentially blockade eastern ports. These are not the actions of a man planning limited border skirmishes. Devereux frowned, clearly troubled by this information. You paint a concerning picture, Lady Elowen, but what exactly does King Ronan propose? A formal defensive alliance, she replied without hesitation. Mutual aid in the event of aggression from Winthorpe. Combined military, planning and intelligence sharing, and she paused for effect. Preferential trade terms for Highcrest iron within Caerwyn's markets. The last offer caught Devereux's attention, just as Ronan had predicted it would. Preferential how exactly? Reduced tariffs and guaranteed purchase. Agreements for the next 5 years, Elowen specified. King Ronan understands the value of Highcrest craftsmanship. Generous terms, Devereux acknowledged. But such agreements require the consent of all 5 alliance territories. I cannot speak for my peers. Which is why, after concluding our discussions here, I will continue on to meet with the other lords, Elowen explained. But Highcrest is the keystone of the alliance. Your support would carry significant weight with the others. Devereux studied her with newfound respect. You negotiate well for a woman who claims she was merely an ornament in her husband's court. I observe. I learn and I adapt, Elowen replied simply. Qualities that served me well in surviving Aldrich, and which now serve King Ronan's interests, and potentially yours. A hint of a smile appeared beneath Devereux's thick beard. I begin to understand why Ronan chose you for this mission. He rose from his chair. We will continue these discussions tomorrow after I've consulted with my advisors. In the meantime, you and your escort are welcome guests in Highcrest. As servants showed her to the guest quarters prepared for her, Elowen reflected on the day's events. The initial meeting had gone better than she had dared hope. Devereux hadn't dismissed her outright, and he seemed genuinely concerned by the information she had shared regarding Aldrich's movements. From the window of her assigned chamber she could see the sun setting behind the western mountains, the direction of Caerwyn. Despite the relative success of her mission thus far, worry for Ronan and the kingdom that had become her sanctuary gnawed at her. What was happening in her absence? Had Aldrich made his move yet? Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the door. Captain Bryce entered, his expression grave. My lady, a messenger arrived from Caerwyn just minutes ago. He rode hard through the mountain passes to find us. Elowen's heart clenched. What news? Duke Aldrich has launched his first offensive, a probing attack against the eastern outposts. Nothing major yet, but King Ronan believes it's the prelude to a larger assault. Any casualties? She asked, dreading the answer. Minimal on our side. The outposts were well prepared thanks to your warnings about Aldrich's typical tactics. Relief washed through her, though it was tempered by the knowledge that this was only the beginning. Does the messenger carry instructions for us? Bryce nodded. King Ronan urges you to secure the Alliance's support as quickly as possible. The captain hesitated. He also included a personal message, written, not verbal. He handed her a small sealed parchment. Once alone, Elowen broke the royal seal with trembling fingers. The message was brief, written in Ronan's distinctive, strong hand. Eloan. The game has begun, earlier than we hoped, but not before we prepared. Your insights have already saved lives. Complete your mission with all haste, but above all, keep yourself safe. Carwyn needs you. I need you. Archie pressed the parchment to her heart, emotion welling in her chest. 3 simple words. I need you. Yet they carried a weight that transcended their apparent simplicity. Not, Carwyn needs your knowledge, or we need the Alliance's support, but the direct personal acknowledgement of a connection that had grown between them. With renewed determination, Elowen folded the message carefully and tucked it into her gown. Tomorrow, she would redouble her efforts with Lord Devereux. The fate of Carwyn, and of Ronan himself, might well depend on her success. The council chamber of Highcrest Fortress hummed with tense discussion. 3 days of negotiations had culminated in this moment. Representatives from all 5 territories of the Eastern Alliance gathered around the massive oak table, with Lord Devereux at its head and Elowen positioned as Carwyn's voice. Maps and documents littered the polished surface, evidence of the complex diplomatic dance that had unfolded. The terms are fair, declared Lady Meredith of Silver Lake, a shrewd woman in her mid-40s whose territory controlled the Alliance's most productive silver mines. King Ronan offers substantial trade concessions in exchange for military support. Fair, perhaps, but are they wise? Countered Lord Blackwood, the eldest of the Alliance leaders, his gnarled hands resting on an ornate walking stick. Duke Aldrich's quarrel is with Carwyn, not with us. Intervention risks bringing his wrath upon our lands. Elowen had anticipated this argument. Indeed, she had heard similar sentiments throughout her meetings with individual Alliance leaders. She waited, allowing the debate to unfold naturally before making her final appeal. Lord Devereux cleared his throat, commanding immediate attention.
Lady Elowen has spent the past days presenting evidence of Duke Aldrich's ambitions. I believe it's time we hear her closing arguments before reaching our decision. All eyes turned to Elowen. She rose gracefully, her burgundy gown, a deliberate
choice that evoked authority without directly mimicking Carwyn's royal blue, catching the light from the chamber's high windows.
My lords and ladies of the Alliance, she began, her voice clear and steady. I've shown you maps of Aldrich's troop movements, shared intelligence reports from our spies, and provided evidence of his outreach to the mountain clans and coastal
kingdoms. What I haven't yet shared is what I know of the man himself. She paused, allowing her words to sink in. For 10 years, I watched Duke Aldrich operate. I observed his methods, his motivations, and his mindset. He views diplomacy as merely a delay tactic, a way to keep potential opponents complacent while he positions his forces. He respects only strength and exploits any perceived weakness. Her eyes swept the assembled leaders. Make no mistake, he sees your neutrality not as wisdom, but as fear. Lord Blackwood frowned. Bold claims from a bitter former wife. Not bitter, my lord, Elowen corrected calmly. Clear-sighted. I have no personal vengeance to seek against Duke Aldrich. What I seek is to prevent others from suffering the same pattern of betrayal and aggression that defines his rule. She moved to the map spread across the table, indicating the border territories. Consider this. Aldrich first probes for weakness with small incursions, as he's already begun doing along Carwyn's eastern border. Once he identifies vulnerable points, he launches targeted strikes designed to secure strategic resources, in Carwyn's case, the fertile eastern valleys and river crossings. Her finger traced a path from Winthorpe through Carwyn and toward the Alliance territories. When he secures those objectives, where do you imagine he will look next? The iron mines of Highcrest, the silver of Silver Lake, the timber forests of Oakenshield. A heavy silence settled over the chamber as the Alliance leaders contemplated her words. You speak with conviction, Lady Elowen, Lady Meredith observed. But how can we be certain these patterns will hold true? People can change, even Duke Aldrich. Elowen met her gaze directly. Some people can change, yes, but Aldrich's ambition is not a passing mood or a temporary policy. It is the core of who he is. She straightened her shoulders. He left me to die in the desert simply because I had become inconvenient to his political aspirations. Ask yourselves, what would he do to those who actively stand in his path? The question hung in the air, unanswerable yet compelling. Lord Devereux broke the silence. I have made my decision. Highcrest will honor the proposed alliance with Cerwyn. He looked around the table. I cannot and will not speak for the rest of you, but consider carefully the choice before us. Together, the alliance and Cerwyn present a formidable defense. Divided, we invite conquest, if not today, then tomorrow. One by one, the other leaders declared their positions. Lady Meredith of Silverlake and Lord Rylan of Oakenshield pledged their support immediately. Lord Blackwood of Stonehaven reluctantly agreed, citing his respect for Lord Devereux's judgment more than conviction in Elowyn's arguments. Only Lord Edmund of Riverwatch hesitated, but even he eventually conceded that a unified front offered the best protection for his people. As the Council concluded with the formal signing of the alliance treaty, Elowyn felt a wave of relief wash over her. The first and most crucial phase of her mission was complete. Now came the equally vital task of coordinating the combined forces to meet Aldrich's imminent threat. You've accomplished something remarkable, Lady Elowyn, Lord Devereux commented, as they exited the council chamber. Few diplomats could have secured unanimous agreement from the alliance, especially in such pressing circumstances. The evidence was compelling, she replied modestly, and the threat is real. Indeed. His expression grew more serious. Our scouts returned this morning with troubling reports. Duke Aldrich's forces have moved beyond probing attacks to a more sustained offensive along Cerwyn's eastern border. King Ronan has personally taken command of the defense at Eastwatch Fortress. Elowyn's heart clenched. I must return to Cerwyn immediately. A dangerous journey given the current military movements, Devereux cautioned. The direct route would take you perilously close to active combat zones. Nevertheless, I must go. King Ronan needs to know the alliance stands with Cerwyn, and I... She hesitated, then continued with quiet determination. I need to be there. Devereux studied her face, seeming to recognize something in her expression. I'll provide an armed escort, my elite guard rather than just your existing protection. They know the mountain passes better than anyone. 2 days later, Elowyn's expanded caravan moved swiftly through a hidden valley, taking advantage of local knowledge to bypass the main roads where Aldrich's scouts might be watching. Captain Bryce rode beside her horse, having insisted she abandon the wagon for faster travel. We should reach the border by nightfall, he informed her, scanning the ridgelines with practiced vigilance. From there, it's another day's hard ride to Eastwatch. Elowyn nodded, her mind already at the fortress where Ronan commanded Cerwyn's defenses. The reports they'd received painted an increasingly dire picture, Aldrich's forces pressing harder against Cerwyn's eastern territories, with particular focus on Eastwatch Fortress itself. You've done well, my lady, Bryce said unexpectedly. Lady Ravenna will be impressed when she learns how quickly you secured the alliance's support. Let's hope it's quickly enough, Elowyn replied. As dusk fell, they crested a hill to find smoke. Rising from the valley below, not the controlled smoke of campfires, but the billowing dark clouds of warfare. In the distance, pinpoints of flame dotted the landscape where villages burned. We're too late, Elowyn whispered. The battle has already spread this far west. Bryce's expression hardened. We need to change course. This route is compromised. Before he could issue new orders, the distinctive whistling of arrows cut through the air. Ambush, he shouted, drawing his sword as the first wave of projectiles rained down on their group. Chaos erupted as horses reared and men scrambled for cover. Elowyn's mount bolted forward, nearly throwing her before she regained control. Years of formal riding lessons combined with her recent training under Lady Ravenna allowed her to maintain her seat and guide the frightened animal toward a copse of trees where several of her escort had already taken defensive positions. Stay down, my lady, Bryce called, positioning himself between her and the direction of attack. Figures emerged from the underbrush ahead, soldiers in Winthorpe colors, their swords drawn. Not a random patrol, Elowyn realized with cold clarity, but a targeted ambush. Somehow, Aldrich had learned of her mission. The fighting was brutal and swift. Though outnumbered, the combined forces of Carwyn's guards and Highcrest's elite warriors held the advantage in skill. Steel clashed against steel, men shouted orders and warnings, horses screamed in panic or pain. Elowen was not a passive observer. When a Winthorpe soldier broke through their defensive line, she drew the short sword Lady Ravenna had insisted she carry, parrying his initial thrust, just as she had been taught. Her counterattack lacked power, but found precision, slicing across the man's sword arm and forcing him to drop his weapon. "We need to break through," Bryce shouted, cutting down another attacker. "We can't hold this position indefinitely." On his command, the escort regrouped into a tight formation with Elowen at its center. They charged forward, cutting a path through the ambushers toward the distant tree line that would provide better cover. They had nearly reached safety when a second wave of Winthorpe soldiers emerged from the forest, a calculated trap closing around them. Elowen felt fear rise in her throat, but forced it down. Now was not the time for panic. "There!" she called, pointing to a narrow ravine to their right. "We can funnel them through that choke point." Bryce nodded grimly, recognizing the tactical advantage. "To the ravine!" he ordered, and the escort adjusted course. The gambit worked, allowing their smaller force to engage the numerically superior enemy in more favorable terrain. One by one, Winthorpe soldiers fell as they attempted to navigate the narrow passage, where only 2 men could fight abreast. Victory seemed within reach when a horn blasted from the hills behind them. "Reinforcements, but for which side?" "Carwyn banners," shouted one of the Highcrest guards, his voice thick with relief. Riders poured down the hillside, their blue and silver colors unmistakable even in the fading light. At their head rode a figure Elowen recognized instantly. Ronan himself, his sword gleaming as he led the charge. The Winthorpe forces, caught between Elowen's escort and the arriving Carwyn forces, quickly disintegrated. Some fled into the surrounding woods, while others threw down their weapons in surrender. As the fighting subsided, Elowen urged her horse forward to meet Ronan. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his eyes scanning her for injuries even as he approached. "Elowen," he said, her name both a question and a statement of relief. "I'm unharmed," she assured him, sliding from her saddle. "Though it was a near thing. How did you find us?" "Lord Devereux's messenger reached us yesterday with news of your departure route." His expression darkened. "We've been fighting Aldrich's forces all along the border. When reports came of a specialized unit moving to intercept a caravan from the Alliance territories, I feared the worst." "You came yourself," she observed, the significance of his personal intervention not lost on her. "I did." His eyes held hers, intense and unguarded in the aftermath of battle. "I couldn't entrust your safety to anyone else." Around them, soldiers secured prisoners and tended to the wounded, but in that moment, it felt as though they stood alone in the gathering dusk. "The Alliance has agreed to support Carwyn," Elowen reported, returning to the matter at hand despite the emotions swirling within her. "All 5 territories have signed the treaty." Relief washed across Ronan's features. "That's crucial news. Aldrich's offensive has been more aggressive than we anticipated. He's committed nearly his entire force to this campaign." "He's desperate," Elowen analyzed. "He knows that if he doesn't secure a quick victory, the combined strength of Carwyn and the Alliance will eventually overwhelm him." A soldier approached, interrupting their conversation. "Your Majesty, we've secured the area, but our scouts report more Winthorpe units moving in this direction." Ronan nodded. "We return to Eastwatch immediately, gather the wounded and prepare to move out." As the preparations for departure swirled around them, Ronan turned back to Elowen. "We have much to discuss, but it will have to wait until we're safely behind Eastwatch's walls." The journey to the fortress was tense, with Ronan's forces maintaining battle-ready formation throughout. Eastwatch itself appeared on the horizon just as dawn broke, a formidable structure of gray stone perched on a rocky outcropping overlooking the main road into Carwyn's eastern territories. Even from a distance, Elowen could see evidence of recent attacks, scorch marks on the outer walls, the remnants of siege equipment being cleared from the fields before the gate. As they rode through the massive iron-reinforced gates, Elowen felt a strange sense of homecoming. Not because she had any particular connection to this fortress, but because Ronan was here. And somehow, over these past months, her concept of home had shifted from a place to a person. Inside the courtyard, organized chaos reigned as soldiers tended to horses, smiths repaired damaged weapons and armor, and messengers darted between different sections of the fortress. Lady Ravenna emerged from the central keep, her expression lighting with relief when she spotted Elowen. "You made it," she said simply, clasping Elowen's arm in greeting once she had dismounted. "When we heard about the ambush—" "Thanks to your training," Elowen replied with a tired smile. "And King Ronan's timely arrival." Lady Ravenna's knowing glance between them suggested she understood more than was being said aloud. "Come, you both need rest and food, and the war. Council awaits an update on the Alliance's decision." Hours later, after the immediate necessities had been addressed, Elowen found herself on the fortress battlements, gazing out at the darkening landscape where pinpricks of light revealed the positions of Aldrich's forces, too close for comfort, but held at bay by Eastwatch's formidable defenses. Footsteps behind her announced Ronan's approach. He joined her at the parapet, his face showing the strain of command and recent battle, yet somehow more handsome for it. "You should be resting," he observed. "As should you," she countered with a small smile. Silence settled between them, comfortable despite the circumstances. "I feared I might not see you again," Ronan admitted finally, his voice low, "when reports came of Aldrich's ambush." "Yet here I am," Elowen said softly. "A little battered, perhaps, but unbroken." "Unbroken indeed." He turned to face her fully. "You've accomplished something remarkable, Elowen. The Alliance's support may well turn the tide of this war." "We haven't won yet," she reminded him, ever practical. "No, but thanks to you, we have a fighting chance." His hand found hers on the stone parapet, his touch warm despite the cool evening air. "When this is over," a horn blast from the watchtower cut through the night, followed immediately by shouts of alarm. Ronan's posture instantly shifted from man to monarch, his gaze sharpening as he scanned the darkness beyond the walls. "Fire arrows!" came the cry from the eastern watchtower. "They're attacking the eastern gate." Ronan's fingers tightened briefly around Elowen's before he released her hand. "Duty calls," he said with grim determination. "Be careful," she urged, the simple phrase carrying the weight of everything still unspoken between them. He held her gaze for one heartbeat longer. "Always," he promised before turning to descend the battlements and take command of Cerwyn's defense once more. Dawn broke over Eastwatch Fortress, revealing the aftermath of the night's battle. Scorched earth surrounded the eastern wall where Aldrich's forces had attempted to breach the defenses with fire and battering rams. Bodies in Winthorpe colors lay scattered across the field, grim testament to the failed assault. Inside the fortress, soldiers moved with weary determination, repairing damaged sections of wall, treating the wounded, and preparing for the next inevitable attack. Elowen stood in the command chamber, studying the large map table where wooden markers represented the positions of both Allied and enemy forces. The situation had evolved significantly in the 2 weeks since her return from the Eastern Alliance. Alliance troops had begun arriving 3 days after the signing of the treaty, bolstering Cerwyn's defenses and allowing Ronan to take a more aggressive stance against Aldrich's incursions. "Lady Elowen," she turned to find Lord Chancellor Harrington entering the chamber, his scholarly appearance somewhat diminished by the practical leather jerkin he wore over his usual robes, a concession to the realities of fortress life during wartime. "Lord Chancellor," she acknowledged with a nod. "Any word from our scouts?" "Indeed." He approached the map, adjusting several markers. "Aldrich's main force has pulled back to this ridge, approximately 3 miles east. They appear to be regrouping after last night's losses." "And the supply lines?" Elowen asked, gesturing to the narrow mountain passes that served as crucial routes for both provisions and reinforcements. "Secure for now. Lady Ravenna's rangers ambushed a Winthorpe patrol that was attempting to locate our southern supply route." Harrington's expression became more troubled. "However, there's another matter of concern. One of the prisoners taken last night has revealed something disturbing." Elowen's attention sharpened. "What is it?" "It seems there may be a traitor among us, someone feeding information to Duke Aldrich about our defenses and strategies." The Chancellor lowered his voice, though they were alone in the chamber. The timing of their attacks has been too precise, targeting vulnerabilities almost as soon as they develop. A cold weight settled in Elowen's stomach. The possibility had occurred to her as well, given the uncanny accuracy of Aldrich's tactical decisions, but hearing it confirmed made the threat immediate and visceral. "Have you informed His Majesty?" she asked. "He's interrogating the prisoner personally as we speak." Harrington adjusted his spectacles nervously. "He requested your presence. Once you were available." "Where?" "The lower cells. I'll have a guard escort you." The fortress dungeons were Spartan but not cruel, a reflection of Ronan's approach to justice. Elowen followed a taciturn guard down a spiral staircase, the air growing cooler and damper. With each step, they reached a heavy wooden door flanked by 2 soldiers in Caerwyn colors. "Lady Elowen to see His Majesty," her escort announced. The door opened to reveal a stone chamber illuminated by wall-mounted torches. Ronan stood with his back to the entrance, his stance rigid with tension. Across from him, a man in torn Winthorpe livery sat bound to a sturdy chair, his face bearing evidence of battle, but not torture. Ronan turned at her entrance, his expression grave. "Elowen, thank you for coming." Despite the formality of his words, his eyes conveyed a deeper meaning, relief at her presence, trust in her judgment. "Chancellor Harrington mentioned a possible traitor," she said, getting directly to the point. "Yes." Ronan gestured to the prisoner. "This is Captain Thorne of Winthorpe's elite guard. He's been surprisingly forthcoming about certain matters." The prisoner, a hard-faced man with a recent sword cut along his jaw, regarded Elowen with open curiosity. "So you're the famous Lady Elowen," he remarked, his voice carrying the distinctive accent of Winthorpe's northern provinces. "Duke Aldrich has offered a substantial reward for your capture." "I'm sure he has," Elowen replied evenly, "though I doubt my welfare is his primary concern." "Definitely not," Thorne agreed with surprising candor. He was quite explicit about what should happen to you before your return to Winthorpe. Ronan's jaw tightened visibly, but he maintained his composure. Captain Thorne was explaining how Aldrich's forces have been so well informed about our defensive positions. "And?" Elowen prompted, meeting the prisoner's gaze directly. Thorne shrugged, the gesture limited by his bonds. "As I told His Majesty, I don't know the traitor's identity. That information was kept compartmentalized. Only Duke Aldrich and his spy master knew who was passing along intelligence. But the information came regularly, and it was accurate." "What exactly was shared?" Elowen asked, her tactical mind already assessing the potential damage. "Patrol schedules, weak points in your defenses, the location of your supply caches." Thorne's expression became more serious. "And most recently, details about the Alliance, reinforcements, when they would arrive and in what numbers." Ronan exchanged a concerned glance with Elowen. The specificity of the intelligence suggested someone with access to the highest levels of military planning. "Tell her about the signal," Ronan instructed Thorne. The captain nodded. "The traitor communicates using light signals from the western tower, 3 short flashes followed by a long one. It happens every 3rd night just after midnight." "Tonight would be the 3rd night," Elowen calculated quickly. "Precisely," Ronan confirmed, "which gives us an opportunity to identify the traitor." After extracting what additional information they could from Captain Thorne, Ronan and Elowen left the dungeons, walking together through the fortress corridors, toward the more private setting of the commander's study. "Do you have a plan?" Elowen asked once they were alone. Ronan nodded, moving to pour 2 goblets of watered wine from a pitcher on his desk. "We'll set a trap, spread false information about a vulnerability in our northern wall, something tempting enough that Aldrich would commit significant forces if he believed it, and station trusted observers to watch for the signal," Elowen concluded, accepting the offered goblet. "It could work, but we need to be selective about who knows the real plan." "Very selective," Ronan agreed grimly. "The traitor must have significant access and authority to have obtained the information Thorne described. The implication hung heavily between them. The traitor was likely someone they knew, perhaps even someone they trusted. Who do you want involved in the real operation?" Elowen asked. Lady Ravenna, of course. Sir Gareth. You. Ronan's eyes met hers. Beyond that, I'm not certain we can risk telling anyone. Not even Lord Chancellor Harrington? Ronan hesitated. I've known Harrington for 15 years. I want to believe in his loyalty. But we can't afford to take chances, Elowen finished for him. I understand. They spent the next hour refining their plan, mapping out positions and contingencies with the practiced efficiency of two minds that had grown accustomed to working in tandem. When they finished, the afternoon was already fading toward evening. We should rest before tonight, Ronan suggested, running a hand through his dark hair, now streaked with dust from the recent battle. It could be a long vigil. Elowen nodded, though she doubted sleep would come easily with the identity of the traitor weighing on her mind. She had just reached the door when Ronan spoke again. Elowen. Something in his tone made her turn back. I've been meaning to tell you. Your handling of the alliance negotiations was masterful. Lord Devereux's messenger brought not only confirmation of troops but a personal note expressing his admiration for your diplomatic skills. A small smile curved her lips. High praise, from a man not known for offering it lightly. Well-deserved praise, Ronan corrected, moving closer. You've proven yourself not just as an advisor but as a diplomat, strategist, and, he hesitated, and as someone I've come to depend on more than I ever expected. The air between them seemed to grow charged with unspoken emotion. Elowen was acutely aware of his proximity, of the intensity in his gray eyes, of her own quickening pulse. Ronan, she began, uncertain what she intended to say but feeling the need to speak nonetheless. I know, he said softly. This is hardly the time or place for certain conversations, with a traitor in our midst and Aldrich at our gates, and yet, Elowen found herself saying, if recent events have taught me anything, it's that waiting for the perfect moment can mean waiting forever. Something shifted in Ronan's expression, a dropping of the royal mask, revealing the man beneath the crown. In 2 steps he closed the distance between them, one hand coming up to gently cup her cheek. I have thought of you, he confessed, his voice low and intimate. At the most inappropriate times. In council meetings, during battle planning, even in the midst of last night's attack. Your voice in my mind, your perspective shaping my decisions. Elowen's hand rose to cover his. And I have thought of you with a frequency that would have scandalized the court at Winthorpe, she admitted with a small, wry smile. It seems we are equally distracted. Distracted, yes. His thumb traced the curve of her cheekbone, but also clearer of mind and purpose than I've ever been. The moment balanced on a knife's edge of possibility. Then, with a decisiveness that matched his character, Ronan leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question, an offering, but quickly deepened as Elowen responded, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. Unlike the calculated political affection Aldrich had occasionally bestowed, this embrace carried genuine emotion, a connection that transcended their current circumstances. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Ronan rested his forehead against hers. I have wanted to do that since the night of the autumn equinox feast, he murmured. The night someone tried to poison me? Elowen asked, unable to suppress a small laugh. How romantic. His answering smile transformed his usually serious features. The night I realized how terrified I was at the thought of losing you. The declaration, simple yet profound, sent warmth spreading through Elowen's chest. After years of being valued only for political advantage, being treasured for herself, her mind, her courage, her very presence, felt like a gift beyond measure. We should still rest before tonight, she said reluctantly, knowing they had responsibilities that couldn't wait, regardless of this new development between them. We should, Ronan agreed, though he made no immediate move to release her. Though I suspect sleep will be even more elusive now. With visible reluctance, he stepped back, his hand sliding down to capture hers for one final squeeze before letting go. Until tonight, then. Until tonight, she echoed, the promise encompassing far more than just their plan to catch the traitor. Hours later, concealed in the shadows of an unused storeroom with a clear view of the western tower, Elowen kept watch alongside Lady Ravenna. Neither spoke, their attention focused on the moonlit battlement where the signal would appear if their information was correct. The fortress had grown quiet as midnight approached with only the necessary guards at their posts. Earlier that evening, Ronan had deliberately mentioned the supposed weakness in the northern wall during a strategy meeting attended by all his senior advisors and commanders. Movement, Lady Ravenna whispered, her sharp eyes catching what Elowen had missed. A hooded figure emerged onto the western battlement, glancing furtively around before producing something from beneath their cloak. A small mirror caught the moonlight, angling to send precisely timed flashes toward the distant ridge where Aldrich's forces were encamped. 3 short flashes, followed by one long one. "It's time," Elowen murmured. They moved silently from their hiding place, joined by Ronan and Sir Gareth, who had been watching from a different vantage point. The 4 converged on the tower stairs, climbing swiftly but quietly. The traitor was still signaling when they emerged onto the battlement. At the sound of their approach, the figure whirled around, hood falling back to reveal Lord Talbot. Ronan's voice cut through the night, cold with betrayal. "I had hoped our prisoner was mistaken." The elderly nobleman's face contorted with a mixture of defiance and resignation. "You understand nothing, Your Majesty. Aldrich offered me more than just gold. He offered restoration of my family's ancient lands, lands your grandfather seized during the border disputes. And that justifies—" "Betraying your kingdom? Your king?" Ronan demanded, his hand resting on his sword hilt. "How many of your fellow soldiers died because of the information you provided?" Talbot's chin lifted defiantly. "War always has casualties. I chose to be on the winning side." "A miscalculation," Lady Ravenna said coldly, stepping forward to restrain "The traitor, as you'll soon discover." As Talbot was led away, Ronan turned to Elowen, his expression grave. "We have the traitor, but the damage is done. Aldrich knows too much about our defenses, our strategies." "Then we change them," Elowen replied simply. "All of them. And we feed him false information through Lord Talbot. Let him think his spy is still in place." A slow smile spread across Ronan's face. "Brilliant. We'll turn his own tactic against him. But first," Elowen added, "we should get some rest. Tomorrow will require clear minds and careful planning." Ronan nodded, though as they descended the tower stairs, he spoke quietly, so only she could hear. "I meant what I said earlier, Elowen. Whatever comes next, we face it together." In the dim torchlight, she reached for his hand, a silent affirmation of both his words and the deeper sentiment behind them. Together they had uncovered a traitor. Together they would confront whatever challenges lay ahead, including the looming shadow of Duke Aldrich. 3 days after Lord Talbot's arrest, the walls of Eastwatch Fortress trembled under the assault of Aldrich's war machines. Massive stones hurled by trebuchets crashed against the ancient stonework, while waves of soldiers bearing scaling ladders and battering rams surged forward like a deadly tide. The siege that had been brewing for weeks had finally erupted into full-scale warfare. From her position on the central keep's highest tower, Elowen surveyed the battlefield with grim determination. Though not a military commander by training, her strategic mind and intimate knowledge of Aldrich's tactics had earned her a place in Ronan's war council. And now, as the battle unfolded, she worked alongside Lady Ravenna, coordinating the fortress's defense. "Eastern wall holding," reported a messenger, breathless from his sprint up the tower stairs. "Sir Gareth requests additional archers if they can be spared." Lady Ravenna consulted the tactical map spread before them, where markers indicated the position of their forces. "We can redirect 20 bowmen from the northern section. Aldrich's focusing his main thrust on the east and south, just as we anticipated." "Send the order," Elowen confirmed, then turned to another messenger. "What news of the Alliance reinforcements?" "Lord Devereux's heavy cavalry was spotted crossing the ridge an hour ago. They should arrive at our western flank within the hour." A flicker of hope kindled in Elowen's chest. The trap they had laid using Lord Talbot as an unwitting pawn was working. Aldrich had committed the bulk of his forces to a frontal assault, unaware of the Alliance troops positioned to strike his exposed flank. Inform His Majesty, she instructed. The timing will be critical. As the messenger departed, Lady Ravenna cast a sidelong glance at Elowen. He wanted you with him, you know, leading the defense from the eastern battlements. Elowen nodded, understanding the unspoken implication. In the days since their shared moment in Ronan's study, there had been no opportunity for private conversation, only brief exchanges laden with meaning amid the frenetic preparations for battle. The king needs to be seen leading his troops, she replied. And I serve Carwyn better here, coordinating with you and managing the overall defensive strategy. Practical as always, Lady Ravenna observed with the ghost of a smile, though I suspect there were other considerations in his decision to position you here, in the most defensible section of the fortress. Before Elowen could respond, the tower Doctor burst open again, admitting a blood-spattered soldier whose armor bore the marks of recent combat. My ladies, he gasped, Duke Aldrich has been spotted leading the assault on the southern gate. He's brought his elite guard. They're cutting through our defenses like a hot blade through butter. Elowen's blood ran cold. This was unexpected. Aldrich typically commanded from the rear, preserving his safety while sending others to die for his ambitions. For him to personally lead an attack suggested either supreme confidence or desperate gamble. We need to reinforce the southern section immediately, she decided, and alert His Majesty. If Aldrich himself is on the field, Lady Ravenna was already issuing orders, dispatching runners and redirecting reserves. Elowen turned back to the, battle map, her mind racing through scenarios and countermoves. If Aldrich was making a personal play for the southern gate, it could mean one of two things. Either he believed victory was within his grasp, or it's a diversion, she realized, suddenly the pattern clicking into place. He wants us to redirect our forces south while his main assault force breaches the eastern wall. Lady Ravenna froze mid-order. Are you certain? It's his standard stratagem, visible threat to mask the real danger. Elowen's voice gained confidence as she spoke. I've seen him use it in 3 different campaigns. He's never risked himself in direct combat before. Why start now unless it serves a greater purpose? The warrior woman studied Elowen's face for a heartbeat, then nodded sharply. Countermand that last order, she instructed the waiting messenger. Instead, tell Sir Gareth to expect the main thrust at the eastern wall. The southern attack is likely a feint. As the messenger hurried away, Elowen felt a strange mixture of dread and vindication. Reading Aldrich's intentions felt like reopening an old wound, painful yet necessary for healing. I should go there, she said, already moving toward the door, to the eastern battlements. If I'm wrong, if you're wrong, we adjust. Lady Ravenna replied firmly, but I don't think you are. The journey from the central tower to the eastern battlements was harrowing. Elowen moved through corridors crowded with wounded soldiers being carried to the infirmary, messengers relaying orders, and servants hauling water and supplies. Outside, the cacophony of battle intensified, the crash of stone projectiles, the screams of the wounded, the clash of steel against steel. When she finally emerged onto the eastern battlements, the scene before her confirmed her worst fears. A massive ram had been brought up to the eastern gate, protected by a wooden shed that deflected arrows and stones from above. Behind it, ranks of Winthorpe's soldiers waited to exploit any breach. She spotted Ronan immediately, his royal blue surcoat visible even through the chaos, his sword flashing as he rallied the defenders. Without hesitation, she made her way to his side, dodging arrows and stepping over fallen debris. Elowen. Surprise and concern mingled in his voice when he saw her. You should be in the command tower. It's a trap, she interrupted, pitching, her voice to carry over the din of battle. Aldrich at the southern gate. It's a diversion. This is his real target. Understanding dawned in Ronan's eyes. You're certain? Absolutely. He wants you to commit your reserves to the south while he breaks through here. Ronan didn't waste time questioning her assessment. Sir Gareth, he called to his knight commander, double the defense here, and send word. Hold position at the southern gate, but commit no additional forces. As orders were relayed, Ronan turned back to Elowen. I should have anticipated this. You couldn't have, she assured him. You don't think like Aldrich. I do, for better or worse. A tremendous crash shook the battlements as the battering ram struck the gate below. Dust and small stones showered down from the impact. That gate won't hold for long, Ronan observed grimly. We need something to neutralize the ram. Alawan scanned the battlements, her gaze settling on several large cauldrons, positioned for defense but not yet employed. The oil, she said, pointing. If we can pour it directly on the ram's protective shed and ignite it, the structure would burn, exposing the ram team to our archers, Ronan finished, already signaling to the soldiers manning the defenses. It could work. The next few minutes unfolded in a blur of coordinated activity. Under Ronan's direction, the cauldrons of oil were positioned directly above the battering ram. Archers with fire arrows stood ready, waiting for the command. Now, Ronan ordered. The hot oil cascaded down, drenching the wooden protective structure. Almost immediately, flaming arrows arced through the air, igniting the oil-soaked wood. Screams erupted from beneath as the ram team found themselves trapped in a sudden inferno. Archers, Ronan commanded. Target the soldiers behind the ram. A deadly rain of arrows fell upon the now exposed Winthorpe forces, cutting down dozens in the first volley. Those who survived fell back in disarray, their coordinated assault disintegrating into chaos. A cheer went up from the Caerwyn defenders, but Elowen knew the battle was far from over. Somewhere on the battlefield, Aldrich was watching his plan unravel, and he would not take the setback lightly. We've bought time, nothing more, she cautioned Ronan. He'll regroup and try again. Time is what we need, he replied, pointing to the western horizon where dust clouds indicated approaching riders. The Alliance cavalry is almost here. A messenger pushed through the ranks of soldiers, his expression urgent. Your Majesty, Duke Aldrich has abandoned the southern assault. He's redirecting his forces to support the eastern attack. So you were right about the diversion, Ronan said to Elowen, but now he's committed to a frontal assault. It makes no sense, she frowned, trying to decipher Aldrich's strategy. Unless... Her blood turned to ice as realization struck. Unless he knows about the Alliance cavalry. Unless he's been expecting them. Ronan's expression darkened. Lord, Talbot is securely imprisoned. How could Aldrich know? There must be another informant, Elowen concluded grimly. Someone else feeding him intelligence. Before Ronan could respond, a tremendous explosion rocked the eastern section of the wall. Stones flew in all directions as a portion of the battlements collapsed, creating a breach large enough for soldiers to pour through. Black powder charges, someone shouted. They've mined the wall. Fall back to the secondary defenses, Ronan ordered, his voice cutting through the ensuing panic. Archers, cover the breach. Infantry, form a defensive line. As the defenders scrambled to reposition, Elowen caught sight of a figure on horseback beyond the wall. A man in elaborate armor adorned with the crest of Winthorpe, directing the assault from a position of relative safety. Even at this distance, she recognized Aldrich's distinctive profile and the calculated precision of his gestures. Ronan, she said quietly, gripping his arm. It's him, directing the attack. Ronan followed her gaze, his jaw tightening. So the Great Duke finally shows himself. Be careful, Elowen warned. This is personal for him now. Not just conquest, but revenge. He knows I'm here, and he knows I'm helping you. All the more reason to ensure he never breaches these walls, Ronan replied, his voice hardening with resolve. Stay close to me, Elowen. If the worst happens and we need to retreat to the inner keep. I won't leave your side, she promised, drawing the short sword Lady Ravenna had trained her to use. The battle intensified as Winthorpe soldiers began pouring through the breach, meeting fierce resistance from Caerwyn's defenders. Ronan fought at the front, his sword flashing in deadly arcs, his presence inspiring those around him to greater feats of courage. Elowen remained nearby, not directly in the fighting, but close enough to assist with tactical decisions as the situation evolved. From her position, she could see Aldrich urging his forces forward, his frustration evident even at a distance as the Caerwyn defenders held their ground. Then, without warning, he spurred his horse forward, leading a wedge of his elite guard directly toward the breach. He's coming himself, Elowen called to Ronan, who had just dispatched a Winthorpe soldier. Aldrich is entering the battle. Ronan's expression hardened. So be it. It's time he faced the consequences of his actions directly. Before he could advance toward the breach, however, a massive war horn sounded from the west. A deep, resonant blast that momentarily halted the fighting as all eyes turned toward its source. Cresting the ridge came the Alliance cavalry, hundreds. Strong, their armor gleaming in the afternoon sun. At their head rode Lord Devereux himself, his war axe raised high as he led the charge directly into the exposed flank of Aldrich's forces. The effect was immediate and devastating. Caught between the defenders at the wall and the cavalry at their rear, the Winthorpe soldiers faltered, their disciplined assault collapsing into desperate individual combat. Alowan watched as Aldrich assessed the suddenly changed battlefield. For a moment it seemed he might press forward regardless, driven by pride and hatred. Then, with visible reluctance, he signaled retreat, wheeling his horse around and galloping away from the breach, his elite guard closing protectively around him. "He's withdrawing," she reported, unable to keep the relief from her voice. "For now," Ronan cautioned, though satisfaction gleamed in his eyes. "But this is a significant victory. We've held Eastwatch, and with the Alliance forces engaged, Aldrich will need to completely reconsider his strategy." As the Winthorpe forces retreated, in growing disorder, pursued by the Alliance cavalry, the defenders of Eastwatch allowed themselves a moment of celebration. Cheers erupted along the battlements. Soldiers embraced comrades they'd feared lost, and even the wounded managed weary smiles. In the midst of the jubilation, Ronan turned to Elowen, his face streaked with dirt and blood, but his eyes alight with something that transcended the simple relief of survival. "Your insight saved us today," he said, his voice pitched for her ears alone, despite the surrounding chaos. "If we had committed our forces to the southern gate as Aldrich intended, it was a team effort," she demurred. "And we still have the problem of another traitor in our midst." "A problem for tomorrow," Ronan replied, reaching out to brush a lock of hair from her face, heedless of who might see the intimate gesture. "Today, we celebrate survival, and the fact that Duke Aldrich has, for the first time, tasted defeat at our hands." The significance of that statement wasn't lost on Alowan. For years, Aldrich had cultivated an aura of invincibility, his military campaigns characterized by overwhelming success. This defeat, however tactical rather than strategic, would damage that reputation, and perhaps more importantly, would wound his pride. "He won't forgive this easily," she warned. "This will only make him more determined." "Let him come," Ronan said with quiet confidence. "Together we've proven he's not invincible." As the sun began to set over the battlefield, casting long shadows across the carnage, Elowen felt a strange sense of completion. She had faced her past today, not just metaphorically, but literally, seeing Aldrich in battle and helping to thwart his plans. The woman who had been abandoned in the desert to die would have been unrecognizable to him now, confident, strategic, and integral to his defeat. "Come," Ronan said, breaking into her thoughts. "We need to meet with Lord Devereux and plan our next steps. This victory has bought us time, but the war is far from over." As they walked together from the battlements, Elowen cast one last glance toward the horizon where Aldrich's forces were retreating. Something told her this wasn't simply a military setback for her former husband. It was a personal affront he would seek to avenge at any cost, and that made him more dangerous than ever. A week after the battle at Eastwatch, an uneasy quiet had settled over the fortress. Aldrich's forces had withdrawn several miles, regrouping at a defensible position along the river that marked the traditional border between Caerwyn and Winthorpe. The lull in direct combat had allowed both sides to tend their wounded, repair defenses, and reconsider their strategies. In the War Council chamber, Ronan stood at the head of the long oak table, surrounded by his most trusted advisors. Maps and reports covered the polished surface, each representing a different aspect of the evolving conflict. "Our scouts confirm Duke Aldrich has received reinforcements from his western garrisons," Sir Gareth reported, indicating positions on the largest map. His losses at Eastwatch were significant, but not crippling. Lady Ravenna nodded grimly. My rangers intercepted a messenger this morning. Aldrich is gathering his strength for another assault, likely within the next 3 days. What of our second traitor? Ronan asked, his gaze moving to Lord Chancellor Harrington. Have we made any progress identifying them? The elderly Chancellor shook his head. I've questioned everyone with access to our battle plans, Your Majesty. No one has revealed any suspicious behavior. And yet, Elowen observed from her position near Ronan, Aldrich knew about the Alliance cavalry's approach. That information was closely guarded. Lord Devereux, who had remained at Eastwatch with his cavalry after the battle, stroked his beard thoughtfully. Could it be someone within my own command? I discussed the approach route only with my captains, but if one of them was compromised, it's possible, Ronan conceded. But that doesn't explain how information continues to flow to Aldrich even now. My guards report that Lord Talbot has had no visitors and no means of communication with the outside world. A tense silence fell over the council as each person considered the implications. The traitor could be anyone, perhaps even someone in this very room. We cannot allow this uncertainty to paralyze us, Ronan finally declared. We must proceed as though our plans may be compromised, which means we need a strategy so bold that even foreknowledge won't help Aldrich counter it. You have something in mind, Elowen observed, recognizing the determined set of his jaw. Ronan nodded, his gray eyes meeting hers briefly before addressing the council. We've been reactive, defending against Aldrich's assaults, responding to his initiatives. It's time we seize the advantage. He leaned forward, placing both hands on the table. I propose a direct strike at Aldrich himself. Murmurs of surprise rippled through the assembled advisors. Even Lady Ravenna, normally unflappable, raised an eyebrow. With all due respect, Your Majesty, she said, Duke Aldrich will be heavily guarded in the center of his camp. A direct assault would be extremely high risk. Not an assault, Ronan clarified. A targeted extraction. A small team moving under cover of darkness could penetrate his defenses and capture Aldrich himself. Assassination? Lord Chancellor, Harrington asked, his scholarly features creased with concern. Capture, Ronan corrected firmly. Aldrich must face justice for his crimes, not just against Cerwyn, but against Lady Elowen and others who have suffered under his rule. All eyes turned to Elowen, whose expression remained carefully neutral despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. The prospect of Aldrich being brought to justice, of him answering for his cruelty and betrayal, was one she had scarcely allowed herself to imagine. Such a mission would require intimate knowledge of Aldrich's habits and the layout of his command tent, she noted, her tactical mind already analyzing the practicalities. Fortunately, I can provide both. You're not suggesting you participate in this mission, Ronan said, an edge of protective concern entering his voice. That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Elowen replied steadily. No one knows Aldrich's patterns better than I do. No one can identify him with absolute certainty in the darkness of a war camp. It's too dangerous, Ronan insisted. If you were captured, then I would face the same risks as any other member of the mission, she countered. My gender doesn't make me less capable, and my knowledge makes me essential. Lady Ravenna nodded in agreement. Lady Elowen has proven herself both in strategy and in direct action. I've trained her myself. She's more capable than many soldiers, with years of service. A muscle worked in Ronan's jaw as he visibly struggled between his role as king and his personal feelings. This isn't about capability, he said finally. It's about Aldrich's particular hatred for you. If captured, you would face worse than death. All the more reason for the mission to succeed, Elowen replied, her voice softer but no less determined. Ronan, you know I'm right about this. The use of his given name in the formal council setting wasn't lost on anyone present, though none remarked upon it. After a long moment, Ronan gave a reluctant nod. We'll discuss the specifics privately, he conceded before turning back to the council. Lady Ravenna will select the team members, only those whose loyalty is beyond question. Lord Devereux, your cavalry will create a diversion to draw attention away from our infiltration point. As the council continued to flesh out the plan, Elowen found herself studying the map of Aldrich's camp, mentally revisiting a place she had hoped never to see again. The thought of coming face to face with her former husband, the man who had ordered her death, sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the cool air of the stone chamber. Later that evening, Elowen stood at the narrow window of her quarters watching as twilight settled over the fortress. The sounds of preparation echoed through the courtyard below. Smiths repairing armor, soldiers training, supply wagons being unloaded, everyone preparing for the next phase of a war that seemed increasingly personal. A soft knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, expecting a messenger with updates about their mission planning. Instead, Ronan himself stepped into the chamber, having dispensed with the formal trappings of kingship. In simple tunic and breeches, with his crown absent, and his dark hair slightly disheveled, he looked more like a battle-weary commander than a monarch. "I thought we might continue our discussion from the council," he said, though his tone suggested he had come for more than strategic planning. Elowen gestured to the small sitting area near the hearth. "Of course." They settled into chairs facing one another, the crackling fire providing both warmth and a gentle background to their conversation. For a moment neither spoke, the weight of what lay ahead creating a tension that seemed to fill the room. "I don't want you on this mission," Ronan finally said, his voice low but intense. "Not because I doubt your abilities, but because I cannot bear the thought of you in Aldrich's hands again." Elowen studied his face, the strong line of his jaw now shadowed with stubble, the faint creases at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both authority and compassion. How different he was from Aldrich, whose handsome features had always been a mask for cold calculation. "I understand your concern," she replied carefully. "But this isn't just about strategy, Ronan. It's about reclaiming my own narrative. For 10 years, I lived under Aldrich's control. Then he tried to erase me completely by leaving me to die in that desert." Her voice strengthened with resolve. "I need to be part of bringing him to justice, not for vengeance but for closure." Ronan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his gaze never leaving hers. "And if something goes wrong? If all we've found together, this unexpected second chance, is cut short because I allowed you to walk into danger?" The raw emotion in his voice touched something deep within her. In the weeks since her rescue, they had moved from wary allies to trusted confidants to something more, something neither had fully defined, but both clearly felt. "Nothing is guaranteed in this life," she said softly, reaching out to take his hand. "Not for kings, not for anyone. We make our choices knowing tomorrow is never promised." His fingers intertwined with hers, warm and strong. "When did you become so wise?" A small sad smile curved her lips. "Wisdom is often the consolation prize for suffering. I've had my share of the latter." Ronan brought their joined hands to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. "Then let me offer something better than consolation." His gray eyes held hers, sincere and unguarded. "When this is over, when Aldrich is brought to justice and this war is behind us, I want to build something new with you, Elowen. Not as king and advisor, but as equals, as partners." The declaration, though not entirely unexpected given the growing connection between them, still caught her off guard with its directness. "Ronan, you don't need to answer now," he assured her quickly. "It's hardly the proper time for such discussions with a dangerous mission looming. But I wanted you to know, needed you to know, what waits on the other side of this conflict." Emotion welled in Elowen's chest, a complex mixture of hope, fear, and something deeper that she had scarcely allowed herself to acknowledge. After Aldrich's betrayal, she had built walls around her heart, convinced that vulnerability led only to pain. Yet here was Ronan, offering not just affection, but partnership, a future built on mutual respect and genuine caring. "Thank you," she said simply, the words inadequate for the depth of her feeling, "for seeing me as I am, not as an ornament or a political asset." "I see you, Elowen," he affirmed, his voice low and certain. "Your strength, your intelligence, your compassion. Everything that Aldrich failed to value I treasure." In the flickering firelight, with the sounds of the fortress muted around them, It was easy to imagine a different world, one without war, without the shadow of Aldrich's threat. But reality remained, and the mission ahead could not be ignored. "Still need to be part of this operation," she said after a moment, gently steering them back to the matter at hand. "Not just for my own closure, but because I genuinely believe my knowledge increases our chances of success." Ronan sighed, resignation mingling with reluctant acceptance. "I know." Lady Ravenna made the same argument after the council dispersed. A hint of a smile touched his lips. "She also suggested that trying to prevent you from participating would be both futile and foolish." "Wise woman," Eowyn observed with a small smile of her own. "Indeed." Ronan's expression grew more serious. "But I have conditions. You will be accompanied by my most elite guards at all times. You will wear armor, light enough for stealth but sufficient for protection. And if I give the order to abort the mission, there will be no arguments." "Agreed," Eowyn conceded, recognizing the compromise for what it was. "Though I expect the same conditions apply to you as well." Ronan's eyebrows rose. "Me? I never said I would be—" "You didn't have to," she interrupted gently. "I know you, Ronan. You would never send others on such a dangerous mission while remaining safely behind. Especially not with me involved." A rueful smile acknowledged the truth of her observation. "It seems we understand each other all too well." "Is that such a terrible thing?" she asked, her voice softening. "No," he replied, reaching out to brush a strand of auburn hair from her face. "It's rather wonderful, actually." The gesture, simple, yet intimate, bridged the remaining distance between them. Without conscious thought, Eowyn leaned forward, meeting Ronan halfway, as his lips found hers in a kiss that deepened quickly, conveying all the emotions words had failed to express. When they finally parted, slightly breathless, Ronan rested, his forehead against hers. "Promise me you'll be careful," he murmured. "Promise me you'll come back." "I promise," she whispered, though they both knew such promises were beyond anyone's power to guarantee in the uncertain world of war. For now, it was enough, this moment of connection before the storm that awaited them. Tomorrow would bring final preparations for the mission. The day after, they would venture into the heart of Aldrich's camp to attempt a daring capture that could end the war in one stroke. But tonight, in the quiet sanctuary of Eowyn's chambers, the future could— Wait, tonight belonged to them alone. Darkness enveloped the small party as they crept through the underbrush toward Aldrich's camp. The night was moonless, a tactical advantage Lady Ravenna had insisted they exploit for their mission. Eowyn moved silently alongside Ronan, both dressed in black leather armor that allowed for stealth while providing moderate protection. Behind them followed 6 of Cerwyn's most elite guards, handpicked by Lady Ravenna herself for their loyalty and skill. The distant sounds of Lord Devereux's cavalry engaging Aldrich's outer patrols drifted through the night, a calculated diversion to draw attention away from their approach. So far, the plan was unfolding precisely as they had hoped. "The command tent will be in the center of the camp," Eowyn whispered as they paused at the edge of the tree line. "Blue with gold trim, flying Winthorpe's banner. Aldrich positions 4. Guards at the entrance with 2 more patrolling the perimeter." Ronan nodded, his features barely visible in the darkness. "Remember, our priority is to capture Aldrich alive. No unnecessary engagements." The small team moved forward as one, keeping low to the ground as they approached the outer edge of the encampment. Campfires dotted the landscape, illuminating groups of soldiers engaged in various activities. Some cleaning weapons, others eating or playing dice to pass the time. Most attention seemed directed toward the eastern perimeter, where Devereux's diversion was successfully drawing forces away from the center. Using the shadows between tents as cover, they advanced methodically through the camp. Twice they were forced to halt as patrols passed nearby, and once Sir Gareth silently subdued a lone sentry who stumbled upon their position. Despite these challenges, they made steady progress toward the heart of Aldrich's operation. "There," Eowyn whispered, pointing to a large tent illuminated from within, its blue fabric appearing almost black in the night. "That's Aldrich's command tent." As predicted, 4 guards stood at attention before the entrance, while 2 more circled the structure at measured intervals. Beyond them, silhouettes moved across the illuminated canvas, officers attending a late war council, perhaps. "We'll need a distraction," Ronan murmured. Sir Gareth produced a small clay pot from his pack. "Fire powder, Your Majesty. 1 pot thrown into that supply wagon should create sufficient chaos without causing casualties." Ronan nodded his approval. "Do it." The knight slipped away, moving like a shadow through the maze of tents. Minutes later, a sharp crack followed by a bright flash erupted from the opposite side of the camp. Shouts of alarm immediately filled the air as soldiers rushed toward the disturbance. "Now!" Ronan ordered, and their team surged forward. The guards, at Aldrich's tent, disciplined despite the commotion, maintained their positions. But their attention had shifted toward the source of the explosion. 2 of Cerwyn's elite guards silently dispatched the perimeter patrol, while Ronan and Sir Gareth dealt with the entrance guards using the hilts of their swords rather than blades, ensuring the men were rendered unconscious without raising alarm. Eloan's heart pounded as they reached the tent entrance. This was the moment all their planning had built toward, the confrontation with Aldrich that would determine not just the outcome of the war, but her own personal closure as well. Ronan caught her gaze, a silent question in his eyes. "Are you ready?" She nodded once, drawing the short sword Lady Ravenna had trained her to use. With a swift motion, Ronan slashed through the tent flap, and they entered together. The scene inside froze in tableau. 3 officers gathered around a large map table, looking up in shock at the intrusion. And there, at the head of the table, stood Duke Aldrich of Winthorpe. At 43, he remained a handsome man, his golden hair now threaded with silver at the temples, his blue eyes still sharp and calculating. He wore a richly embroidered tunic bearing Winthorpe's crest, and his hand immediately went to the sword at his hip. "What is the meaning of—" he began, then stopped abruptly as recognition dawned. His gaze fixed first on Ronan, then shifted to Eloan, disbelief spreading across his features. "Impossible." "Hello, Aldrich," Eloan said, her voice steadier than she had expected. "You look as though you've seen a ghost." The 3 officers reached for their weapons, but Sir Gareth and the guards moved swiftly to disarm them, forcing them to their knees with blades at their throats. "Duke Aldrich," Ronan declared formally, "you are charged with unprovoked aggression against Carwyn, conspiracy with enemies of the realm, and attempted murder of Lady Eloan of Northumbria. Surrender yourself for judgment." Aldrich's initial shock gave way to a cold smile that never reached his eyes. "King Ronan, how kind of you to deliver yourself to my camp, and Eloan, my dear wife. I must say, desert life seems to have agreed with you." "Former wife," she corrected, maintaining her composure despite the chill his voice sent through her. "And yes, I survived your attempt to murder me. I found someone who values loyalty and honor over ambition and cruelty." Aldrich's gaze flicked between her and Ronan, his shrewd mind quickly calculating the nature of their relationship. "How touching," he sneered. "The gallant king and the discarded duchess. I wonder, Ronan, has she told you about her treasonous activities that necessitated her removal?" "Your lies won't work here," Ronan replied evenly. "We know there was no treason except in your imagination, merely a convenient excuse to dispose of a wife who had become inconvenient to your political aspirations." Something dangerous flashed in Aldrich's eyes. "You know nothing of my aspirations, or my marriage." His hand tightened on his sword hilt. "And you are fools to think you can simply walk into my camp and take me prisoner. Your outer defenses are engaged with Lord Devereux's cavalry," Ronan informed him. "Your inner guards have been neutralized. Surrender now, and you'll be treated with the dignity befitting your rank, despite your crimes." Aldrich's laugh was harsh and without humor. "Always so honorable, Ronan. It's your greatest weakness." With lightning speed, he drew his sword and lunged, not at Ronan, but at Eloan. She reacted instinctively, parrying the strike with her own blade. The force of his attack sent her staggering backward, but she maintained her footing, bringing her sword up in the defensive position Lady Ravenna had drilled into her over countless training sessions. Ronan moved to intervene, but Aldrich barked, a command that froze everyone in place. One more step, and my archers will fill this tent with arrows. From outside came sudden shouts and the clash of steel. Their diversion had been discovered, and Aldrich's reinforcements were closing in. "You're bluffing," Ronan challenged, though he halted his advance. "Am I?" Aldrich's smile turned predatory. "Did you really think I wouldn't have contingencies in place? That I wouldn't be prepared for an infiltration attempt?" He kept his sword trained on Elowen. "Your mission was compromised from the start." The realization struck Elowen with chilling clarity. "The second traitor. They warned you we were coming." "Very good, my dear," Aldrich praised mockingly. "Always so perceptive. It's one of the qualities I actually admired about you, though it became rather inconvenient toward the end of our marriage." Outside, the sounds of combat intensified. Sir Gareth shot a concerned glance toward Ronan. "Your Majesty, we're running out of time." "Indeed you are," Aldrich agreed. "So here is my counteroffer. King Ronan will surrender himself as my prisoner. In exchange, I allow Lady Elowen and your men to depart unharmed." "Absolutely not," Elowen said before Ronan could respond. "We came together, we leave together." Aldrich's eyes narrowed. "Still defiant, I see. The desert didn't break you after all." He moved closer, his sword still leveled at her. "But you always did have a remarkable survival instinct. Tell me, Elowen, what did you promise King Ronan in exchange for his protection? The same wifely duties you so reluctantly performed for me?" Rage flashed through her at the deliberate insult, but she forced herself to remain calm. Aldrich was attempting to provoke her, to make her act rashly, a tactic he had employed throughout their marriage. "Your attempts to demean me no longer have power, Aldrich," she replied evenly. "I see you now for what you truly are, not the powerful Duke I once feared, but a small man driven by insecurity and the desperate need to control others." Fury contorted his handsome features. "You dare—" "Yes, I dare," she interrupted, her voice gaining strength, "because I am no longer your possession. I am Lady Elowen of Northumbria, advisor to King Ronan of Cerwyn, architect of the alliance that has halted your expansion, and survivor of your cowardly attempt to silence me." Her words struck home, and for a moment, genuine hatred blazed in Aldrich's eyes. Then, with terrifying suddenness, he attacked again. A vicious slash intended to end her defiance permanently. This time, Ronan intercepted the blow, his sword meeting Aldrich's with a resounding clash of steel. "That's enough," he growled, forcing Aldrich back with sheer strength. "Your quarrel is with me, not her." What followed was a deadly dance of blades as the two rulers engaged in direct combat. Ronan fought with disciplined precision, each movement economical and purposeful. Aldrich's style was more flamboyant, but equally lethal, his technique honed through years of tournament fighting. The tent erupted into chaos as the captive officers attempted to take advantage of the distraction. Sir Gareth and the guards engaged them, creating a secondary battle around the central duel between Ronan and Aldrich. Elowen circled the fighting men, seeking an opening to assist Ronan without endangering him. Outside, the sounds of combat had reached the tent itself. Their escape route was closing rapidly. "We need to end this now," she called to Ronan. "The reinforcements are almost here." Ronan pressed his attack, forcing Aldrich onto the defensive. For a moment, it seemed he might overcome the Duke through sheer skill and determination. Then, Aldrich sidestepped unexpectedly, his blade slipping past Ronan's guard to score a hit along his ribs. Ronan stumbled, momentarily stunned by the pain. Aldrich, sensing advantage, prepared for a killing stroke, only to find Elowen's sword blocking his path. "Not today," she said, her voice deadly calm as she positioned herself between Aldrich and Ronan. Surprise flickered across Aldrich's face, quickly replaced by contempt. "Step aside, Elowen. This is beyond your capabilities." "You've underestimated me for the last time," she replied, and attacked. Her technique lacked Ronan's power or Aldrich's flair, but she fought with absolute focus, her movements precise and unpredictable. Lady Ravenna had trained her well, teaching her to use her opponent's expectations against them, and no one had lower expectations of her capabilities than Aldrich. He parried her first strikes with dismissive ease, only to find himself suddenly defending against a combination he hadn't anticipated. Her blade slipped past his guard, drawing blood from his sword arm. "How?" he began, genuine shock in his voice. "I told you," she said, pressing her advantage. "I am not the same woman you abandoned in the desert." Behind her, Ronan had regained his footing and rejoined the fight. Together, they forced Aldrich back step by step until he found himself cornered against the map table. In that moment, desperation overtook calculation in Aldrich's eyes. With a roar of fury, he swept the maps and markers from the table, creating a momentary distraction, then lunged at Elowen with killing intent. She saw the attack coming, saw the hatred and fear driving it, and sidestepped at the last possible instant. Aldrich's momentum carried him forward, directly into Ronan's waiting blade. The Duke's eyes widened in shock as the sword pierced his shoulder, a disabling but non-lethal wound. His own weapon clattered to the ground as he fell to his knees, clutching the injury. "It's over, Aldrich," Ronan declared, his sword at the Duke's throat. "Surrender now, or die here." For a moment it seemed Aldrich might choose death over capitulation. Then, with visible effort, he controlled his rage and nodded once in surrender. Sir Gareth moved swiftly to bind the Duke's hands, while the remaining guards secured the tent entrance against the approaching reinforcements. "We need to move, Your Majesty," Sir Gareth urged. "Our escape route won't remain viable for long." Ronan nodded, his eyes meeting Elowen's across the chaos of the tent. In that brief exchange, volumes were communicated: relief, pride, the shared understanding that they had accomplished something momentous together. "Take the prisoner," Ronan ordered. "We return to Eastwatch immediately." As they emerged from the tent with Aldrich securely bound between them, chaos reigned throughout the camp. Lord Devereux's diversion had evolved into a full-scale engagement, drawing most of Winthorpe's forces away from the center and creating a corridor for their escape. "This changes nothing," Aldrich hissed as they moved through the confusion of battle. "My men will pursue you. They will free me. Your men are leaderless and facing a combined force of Caerwyn and Alliance troops," Ronan replied. "And soon they will learn that their Duke has been captured. How long do you think their morale will last then?" Aldrich had no answer, his face a mask of impotent rage as they made their way toward the forest, where horses waited to carry them back to Eastwatch. Hours later, as dawn broke over the fortress, Elowen stood on the battlements watching as Aldrich was escorted to the secure cells, deep within the keep. The sight of him, proud even in defeat, his fine clothing now stained with blood from his wound, evoked complex emotions within her. Not satisfaction exactly, nor even vindication, but something closer to resolution, the closing of a chapter that had dominated too much of her life. Footsteps behind her announced Ronan's approach. He had changed from his battle gear and received treatment for his wound, though he moved with the careful precision of someone managing pain. "You should be resting," she chided gently. "As should you," he countered, coming to stand beside her. Yet here we are. Silence settled between them, comfortable despite the momentous events of the night. "It's strange," Elowen said finally. "For so long, Aldrich loomed in my mind as this insurmountable force, powerful, untouchable. Seeing him defeated, captured, it's almost difficult to reconcile with the man who cast such a long shadow over my life." Ronan studied her profile, his expression thoughtful. "The most oppressive shadows often come from sources smaller than we imagine. Aldrich's power over you existed largely in your memory of fear. And now? Now he is simply a man who must answer for his crimes," Ronan replied. "Both against Caerwyn and against you personally?" Elowen nodded slowly, the truth of his words resonating within her. "What happens next?" "Diplomatically, we negotiate with Winthorpe's remaining leadership from a position of considerable strength. Aldrich's capture changes everything. Without his ambition driving their aggression, I suspect they'll be eager to end this conflict." "And personally?" she asked, turning to face him directly. Ronan's expression softened as he reached out to brush a strand of hair from her face. "That depends entirely on you, Elowen." Before the mission, I spoke of building something together after the conflict ended. Those weren't merely words spoken in the heat of emotion. They represented my deepest wish. She caught his hand, holding it against her cheek. I've spent so much of my life defined by my relationship to powerful men. First as a count's daughter, then as a duke's wife. What you're offering, it's what I've always wanted, yet scarcely dared to imagine. Equal partnership, Ronan affirmed. Your mind, your heart, your strength alongside mine. Not in my shadow, but standing in your own light. Emotion welled in Elowen's chest, a fullness that almost hurt in its intensity. I would like that very much, she whispered. The smile that transformed Ronan's features was like sunrise after the longest night. Warm, hopeful, illuminating. He drew her gently into his arms, mindful of his injury, and sealed their understanding with a kiss that carried the promise of all that lay ahead. When they parted, Elowen rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beating of his heart. Below them, Eastwatch Fortress stirred to life in the early morning light, soldiers and servants going about their duties with renewed purpose. Beyond the walls, riders departed in all directions, carrying news of Aldrich's capture to allies throughout the kingdom. One last thing, Elowen said, a thought occurring to her. The second traitor, they're still among us. Yes, Ronan acknowledged, but with Aldrich captured and the immediate threat neutralized, we can conduct a more thorough investigation without the pressure of imminent battle. You have a suspicion, she observed, noting something in his tone. I do, he admitted, but it requires confirmation before we act. For now, let's focus on what we've accomplished. Today marks the beginning of peace for Carwyn and for you. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the eastern mountains in golden light, Elowen allowed herself to truly believe in that promise. Peace, freedom from Aldrich's shadow. A future shaped by choice rather than survival. It was, she reflected, everything her father would have wished for her, and more than she had dared to hope for herself when she knelt in the desert sand, awaiting death. Come, Ronan said, offering his arm. There's much to be done. Together they descended from the battlements, ready to face whatever challenges remained, not as king and advisor alone, but as partners in every sense of the word. Spring had come to Carwyn, transforming the war-scarred landscape into a tapestry of vibrant greens and delicate wildflowers. 6 months had passed since Aldrich's capture. 6 months of diplomatic negotiations, rebuilding efforts, and the careful establishment of a new peace between the kingdoms. The great cathedral of Carwyn, with its soaring stone arches and magnificent stained glass windows, was filled to capacity on this bright morning. Nobles from across the realm and representatives from the Eastern Alliance had gathered for an occasion that symbolized not just the formal end of hostilities, but the beginning of a new chapter for the kingdom. In a small antechamber off the main sanctuary, Elowen stood before a polished silver mirror, hardly recognizing the woman who gazed back at her. Gone was the haunted look that had lingered in her eyes since her abandonment in the desert. In its place was a quiet confidence, a serene strength that came from facing her deepest fears and emerging victorious. Her gown was a masterpiece of the royal seamstress's art, ivory silk embroidered with silver thread in patterns reminiscent of intertwining vines and leaves. Her auburn hair, now grown past her shoulders, had been arranged in an elegant style adorned with small white blossoms and a delicate silver circlet. You look magnificent, came Lady Ravenna's voice from the doorway. The warrior woman had exchanged her usual armor for formal attire, though Elowen had no doubt she still carried at least one concealed weapon. Old habits died hard, especially for the kingdom's spy master. Thank you, Elowen replied, turning from the mirror with a smile. Though I confess I feel rather conspicuous. Lady Ravenna laughed, a warm sound rarely heard during the tense days of war. As you should, today of all days. She approached, adjusting a fold of Elowen's gown with unexpected gentleness. The entire kingdom has been waiting for this moment since the formal announcement. A flicker of nervousness passed through Elowen. Is that an exaggeration meant to calm my nerves? Because I must inform you, It's having the opposite effect. No exaggeration, Lady Ravenna assured her. After everything you and King Ronan accomplished together, securing the alliance, capturing Aldrich, negotiating the peace treaty, the people see your union as the natural culmination of an extraordinary partnership. Elowen smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from her gown, a gesture that betrayed her lingering anxiety. And the traditionalists, those who might have preferred a political match with a neighboring kingdom, silenced by the overwhelming popular support, Lady Ravenna replied confidently. Besides, Lord Chancellor Harrington made quite the compelling case that your marriage actually is a political masterstroke, uniting Northumbria's historical claims with Caerwyn's throne and symbolically healing the wounds between Caerwyn and Winthorpe. The mention of Winthorpe brought a shadow of memory. Aldrich's trial had been swift but fair, with evidence presented from both kingdoms regarding his crimes. Found guilty of unprovoked aggression, attempted murder, and various other offenses, he had been stripped of his titles and lands, sentenced to lifelong imprisonment in a remote monastery where he could do no further harm. Winthorpe itself had undergone significant changes. Without Aldrich's iron grip, the duchy's council had elected Lord Edmund, a moderate nobleman with family ties to both Winthorpe and Caerwyn, as their new leader. The peace treaty had established new borders, reparations for damage caused by the war, and a framework for ongoing cooperation that promised to transform generations of hostility into cautious alliance. "You're thinking of him again," Lady Ravenna observed, breaking into Elowen's thoughts. Briefly, she admitted. Not in regret or fear, but perhaps in acknowledgement. If Aldrich hadn't abandoned me in that desert, I would never have found my way here. A small, wry smile touched her lips. Though I wouldn't recommend his methods to anyone seeking a better life. Lady Ravenna chuckled. Indeed not. Her expression grew more serious. Speaking of better lives, there's someone here who wishes to see you before the ceremony. She stepped aside, revealing a figure waiting respectfully in the corridor. An elderly man with kind eyes and a weathered face that Elowen would have recognized anywhere. "Thomas?" she gasped, moving forward as her father's former steward entered the chamber and bowed deeply. "My lady," he greeted her, his voice rough with emotion. "Or should I say, your majesty to be." "Thomas, please." Elowen embraced the old man warmly. "You've known me since I was a child. Such formality between us feels wrong." The steward straightened, his eyes bright with unshed tears. "When word reached Northumbria of your survival and all that followed, your father would have been so proud, my lady." Elowen felt her own eyes growing moist. "I've thought of him often these past months, especially today." "He is with you in spirit, I've no doubt," Thomas assured her. "And he sent something with me, in a manner of speaking." From within his formal coat, the steward produced a small wooden box, its surface polished by generations of handling. "Your father entrusted this to me before his death, with instructions that it be given to you on your wedding day, should you ever choose to marry again after Duke Aldrich." Elowen accepted the box with trembling hands. Opening it carefully, she found a ring nestled on a bed of velvet, a simple band of gold set with a single sapphire of extraordinary clarity. "Your mother's wedding ring," Thomas explained softly. "Your father kept it after she passed, hoping you might one day wear it with a man worthy of both the ring and you." Emotion closed Elowen's throat as she lifted the ring. Memories of her mother gone since she was 12, washing over her. "I had no idea he'd kept this," she whispered. "He wanted you to have a choice, my lady," Thomas said. "A choice he feared you might not have with Duke Aldrich." "And he was right," Elowen acknowledged, closing her fingers around the precious object. "But now at last I do have a choice, a real one." A soft knock at the door announced a page in royal livery. "My ladies, the ceremony will begin shortly. The guests are seated and His Majesty awaits." Lady Ravenna nodded. "We'll be ready momentarily." As the page withdrew, she turned to Elowen. "Shall I leave you with Thomas for a few minutes?" "Please," Elowen confirmed, grateful for her friend's perceptiveness. Once they were alone, Elowen took the steward's weathered hands in hers. "Thomas, I have a request. My father cannot walk me to Ronan today.
but you were his most trusted friend and advisor. Would you stand in his place?" The old man's eyes widened. "My lady, I'm but a steward." "Your family," she corrected gently. "The closest thing to family I have left. Please, it would mean everything to me." Thomas straightened his shoulders, pride and emotion evident in his bearing. "It would be the greatest honor of my life, Lady Elowen." The cathedral's massive doors swung open to a fanfare of trumpets, and Elowen stepped into the nave on Thomas's arm. The assembled guests rose as one, turning to witness her entrance. The aisle stretched before her, lined with spring flowers and illuminated by hundreds of candles that cast a warm, golden glow throughout the sacred space. And there, at the far end beside the altar, stood Ronan. He had eschewed the more elaborate royal regalia in favor of a simpler coronation crown and formal attire in Cerwyn's colors, deep blue velvet with silver accents that complemented his dark hair and gray eyes. As their gazes met across the length of the cathedral, his solemn expression transformed into a smile of such genuine joy that Elowen felt her heart swell in response. The journey down the aisle felt both eternal and instantaneous. With each step, Elowen was acutely aware of the faces around her, Lady Ravenna watching with rare sentimentality, Lord Devereux and the other alliance leaders nodding in approval, Chancellor Harrington dabbing discreetly at his eyes, Sir Gareth standing proud in his ceremonial armor, and countless others who had shared in their journey from adversaries to allies to something far more profound. When she finally reached Ronan's side, Thomas placed her hand in the king's with formal dignity before stepping back. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone present. The passing of Elowen from her past life into her future, freely chosen and joyfully embraced. "You take my breath away," Ronan murmured, his voice pitched for her ears alone. "As do you," she replied softly, squeezing his hand. The archbishop stepped forward to begin the ancient ceremony, his resonant voice filling the cathedral as he spoke of duty, partnership, and sacred bonds. Throughout the formal prayers and blessings, Elowen remained acutely conscious of Ronan. Beside her, his steady presence, the warmth of his hand, the occasional glance they exchanged that spoke volumes no words could capture. When the time came for the exchange of rings, Elowen surprised Ronan by producing her mother's sapphire band, rather than the one that had been prepared. "My father saved this for me," she explained quietly as she placed it in his palm, "for the day I might marry a man of my choosing, worthy of both the ring and me." Understanding and honor flickered in Ronan's eyes as he accepted the significance of her gesture. With careful reverence, he slid the ring onto her finger, his voice strong and clear as he recited the traditional vows. When it was her turn, Elowen placed the royal signet ring, symbol of her acceptance, not just as wife, but as queen, upon Ronan's hand, her own voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. "By the authority vested in me," the archbishop proclaimed, "I now pronounce you husband and wife, king and queen of Cerwyn. What the divine has joined together, let no mortal divide." The cathedral erupted in cheers as Ronan leaned forward to seal their union with a kiss, gentle yet profound, witnessed by hundreds yet somehow deeply intimate. As they turned to face the assembled guests, now their subjects, Elowen felt a curious sense of completion. The journey that had begun in desperate survival on the desert sands had led here to this moment of triumph and new beginning. The celebration that followed was magnificent even by royal standards. The great hall of Cerwyn Castle had been transformed into a wonderland of flowers, banners, and twinkling lights. Musicians played, dancers performed, and tables groaned under the weight of elaborate feasts prepared to honor guests from across the realm and beyond. During a brief respite from the formal duties of greeting well-wishers, Elowen and Ronan found themselves in a relatively quiet corner of the hall. From this vantage point, they could observe the festivities while sharing a moment of privacy amid the celebration. "Happy?" Ronan asked, his thumb tracing circles on the back of her hand where her mother's ring now rested. Elowen considered the question, not with doubt but with the thoughtfulness that characterized her approach to everything.
Happy seems an insufficient word, she replied finally. Fulfilled, perhaps. Complete in a way I never expected to experience. Ronan's smile deepened with understanding. Not an ending, though, he noted. Rather, a beginning. Indeed. Her gaze swept across the hall, taking in the diverse gathering, nobles from Caerwyn and the Alliance territories, representatives from the new leadership of Winthorpe, merchants, and guildmasters from the capital, even a delegation from her father's lands in Northumbria. We have much to build together. And we will, Ronan assured her, his voice carrying absolute conviction. The peace treaties are just the foundation. What rises from them, the alliances, the trade agreements, the cultural exchanges, will define the region for generations to come. Our legacy, Elowen mused. One of them, he agreed. Though I hope our most important legacy will be more personal. The implication brought a warm flush to Elowen's cheeks. At 39, she was still young enough to bear children, potential heirs who would combine Ronan's steadfast honor with her own resilience and insight. I would like that, she admitted softly. Their moment of privacy was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Devereux, who approached with a ceremonial bow that couldn't quite disguise his practical, straightforward nature. Your Majesties, he greeted them. I hope I'm not intruding. Not at all, Lord Devereux, Ronan assured him. Your presence honors our celebration. The Alliance leader nodded in acknowledgement. I wanted to personally deliver news that I thought might please you both, especially today. He glanced around before continuing in a lower voice. The last of Duke Aldrich's loyal generals has been apprehended attempting to flee to the southern kingdoms. With his capture, the threat of any organized resistance has been effectively eliminated. Elowen exhaled slowly, a tension she hadn't fully acknowledged releasing from her shoulders. That is welcome news indeed. Highcrest's mines are once again operating at full capacity, Devereux continued, shifting to more positive matters. The first shipments under our new trade agreement will reach Caerwyn within the month. Excellent, Ronan said. Please convey our gratitude to your metalworkers. The quality of Highcrest iron is legendary for good reason. As Lord Devereux took his leave, Elowen turned to find Lady Ravenna approaching with purposeful strides that suggested official business rather than wedding congratulations. I apologize for the interruption, Your Majesties, the spymaster said with a formal bow. But I thought Queen Elowen in particular would want to know. We've confirmed the identity of the second traitor. Both Ronan and Elowen straightened, their attention immediately captured. The investigation had continued quietly throughout the peace negotiations, with Lady Ravenna personally overseeing the careful gathering of evidence. Who? Elowen asked. Lady Isabel of Westmere, Lady Ravenna revealed. Duke Aldrich's mistress for the past 3 years, it seems. She had cultivated a friendship with several members of the royal household staff, using them to gather information. Elowen nodded slowly, pieces falling into place. I suspected as much. She visited court shortly before my departure from Winthorpe. Aldrich introduced her as a distant cousin, but the way they looked at each other told a different story. She has been detained discreetly, Lady Ravenna assured them. We thought you might prefer to address the matter after the celebrations. Indeed, Ronan agreed. Justice can wait a day or two. Today is for new beginnings, not old betrayals. As Lady Ravenna departed, Ronan offered Elowen his hand. I believe they're waiting for us to open the dancing. Together they moved to the center of the great hall, where guests parted to form a circle around them. The musicians began a stately pavane that soon gave way to a more lively court dance, with Ronan and Elowen leading the assembled nobles through the intricate steps with practiced grace. Do you remember? Ronan asked as they came together in the pattern of the dance. What you said to me that day on the battlements of Eastwatch. After we captured Aldrich? Elowen smiled at the memory. I believe I said many things that day. You mentioned that for much of your life, you had been defined by your relationship to powerful men. First as a count's daughter, then as a duke's wife. His eyes held hers as they circled one another. I wonder, do you feel defined by your relationship to me now? The question was asked without insecurity, offered instead as an honest inquiry that deserved thoughtful consideration. No,
she answered after a moment. I feel defined by what we build together, by our shared vision, our mutual respect, our combined strength. You don't overshadow me, Ronan. You stand beside me. Satisfaction and love mingled in his expression. As it should be, as it will always be. As the evening progressed and the celebration continued around them, Eowyn found herself drawn to the great windows overlooking the castle gardens. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant hues of gold and crimson, much like the dawn that had greeted her in the desert on the day Ronan found her. She felt his presence before he spoke, a warm certainty that had become as familiar as her own heartbeat. "Contemplating the sunset?" he asked, coming to stand beside her. "And all that came before it," she admitted. "The journey that led us here." Ronan slipped an arm around her waist, drawing her gently against his side. "A long road with many hardships. Yet, I find I wouldn't change it," Eowyn said softly. "Even the darkest moments led to this, to us." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the velvet sky, they stood together at the threshold of their future, no longer merely survivors of separate pasts, but architects of a shared destiny that would reshape not just their own lives, but the kingdom they now ruled as equals. For Eowyn, who had once knelt alone in the desert waiting for death, the fullness of this moment, this life reclaimed and transformed, was nothing short of miraculous. And for Ronan, who had followed an instinct into the wilderness and found not just a woman to save but a partner to cherish, it was the culmination of a hope he had scarcely dared to name. Together they turned back toward the celebration, toward their people, toward the future that awaited, not as king and queen alone, but as two souls who had found in each other the rarest of gifts, a love born of respect, forged in adversity and destined to endure.